Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I drove long haul for about 15 years, mostly east-west routes, Ohio to California or up into Washington when the weather was good. This happened in late March 2018, somewhere in Nebraska. I was hauling fertilizer out of Sioux City and headed down toward Colorado Springs. Route 83 most of the way. Not much out there except empty land and the occasional gas station with bad coffee. That stretch between North Platte and McCook is about as remote as it gets. Flat, long, dead quiet. No radio stations, barely any traffic. If you break down out there, you wait. I'd taken that route dozens of times before. But around mile marker 211, just past 9 p.m., I started hearing this sound on the CB. I wasn't talking to anyone, just had it on, like I always do. The volume was low, but I noticed this clicking. Mechanical, fast, almost like a typewriter. Not Morse code, not static. Just click, 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 evenly spaced, like something cycling. I turned the squelch knob up and down. Didn't help. It wasn't on channel 19 either. It didn't matter what channel I switched to, it stayed there. Low, just under everything, like it was embedded in the signal somehow. I figured it was bleed through from some tower nearby, though I couldn't see anything around me. Just fields and a barbed wire fence under a clear sky. I was between markers 211 and 212 when I noticed something else. One of the stars wasn't staying still. At first I thought it was my windshield. I tapped it, nothing. Wiped the inside, still there. Every time the clicking sound hit a certain rhythm, 3 fast, 1 slow, that particular star would twitch slightly to the left, barely noticeable. Maybe an inch if you held your hand out, then it would stay put, like it was repositioning. That sequence repeated about every 40 seconds. I killed the CB completely. The clicking stopped, but the star still moved. I watched it while driving 65. It didn't blink like the others, just sat there, sharp and white, until the rhythm hit again. Then another small shift. Left. Pause. Nothing. I passed marker 213 and the star stopped moving. The rest of the sky looked normal again. I turned the CB back on. Quiet. Just the usual background hiss. Next night, I came back up the same stretch. Northbound this time. I was curious and I'll admit a little on edge. Around 9:20 p.m., I hit marker 213 again. A couple minutes later, passing 212, the clicking started. It was the exact same pattern. I slowed to 55 and leaned forward to look up through the windshield. That same bright point was there, just above the horizon ahead. Still. Then the clicking hit the sequence. 3 fast, 1 slow. The star shifted. Same direction. Left. Just a little. I tried talking on the CB, asked if anyone else was nearby, if they were hearing what I was. No answer. Didn't even get feedback. That was weird, because usually I'd get some squelch bounce even if nobody replied. Once I crossed 211, it stopped again. Clicking gone. Star held steady. I started timing it. Third night, I made a point of passing through around the same time. It was windy that night. You could see the grain in the fields rippling under the moonlight. When I got between 211 and 213, everything dropped quiet, like the wind cut off. That part freaked me out more than anything. No sound from the rig, no vibration from the road, just silence and those damn clicks. That night, I noticed something else. When the star shifted, my interior dome light flickered. Just once, a little pulse, like a voltage dip. Didn't affect anything else, gauges were steady, engine didn't hiccup, but the light definitely dimmed for a second. I kept both hands on the wheel and didn't touch the CB. The clicking carried on, soft and steady. It felt like something was checking in. That's the only way I can describe it, like a scheduled event. I drove through that stretch another 4 times in the next month. It happened every single time, only between mile markers 211 and 213, and only between 9:10 and 9:40 p.m. Never outside that window. I tried pulling over once, right at 212. Sat there idling with the CB on. The clicking got louder the longer I stayed. Not in volume, just in presence, like it was getting closer to the front of my brain. The star moved again. Then it kind of pulsed. Not a blink. It got slightly brighter for about half a second. The dome light flickered with it. Then I got the smell, like hot copper and ozone. I've only ever smelled that once before, after an inverter fried in an old cab. I threw it in gear and kept driving. I stopped taking that route for a while. Even when dispatch asked, I said I preferred going west through Ogallala. Cost me a few hours, but I didn't care. Last time I drove that section was in January 2020, right before I quit the road. Snow on the shoulders, full moon night, sky clear again. I'd almost forgotten about the whole thing. Then, around 9:15, the CV popped once. No clicking. Just a pop. Then silence. Not static. Silence. I looked up. The star was there. But this time it was already shifted, like it had been watching ahead of schedule. I was walking my dog near the power station off County Line Road. It was late October, chilly but not cold enough for a coat. I remember that because I only had on a sweatshirt and I regretted it halfway through. Wind kept cutting through the trees and made the leash jingle every few steps. This was around 7:30 in the evening. Not fully dark yet, but the sun had dipped enough that everything looked washed out. That part of town always feels a little forgotten. Just fields, dead grass, a couple trails that snake behind the substation. Not really a park, not fenced either. Technically, I don't think I was supposed to be back there, but no one's ever said anything. I'd been walking that route with my dog Max, for months. He liked sniffing around the old service road. There were no cars in the lot by the gate, no sign of workers. The humming from the transformers was the only sound, constant and low, like it vibrated in your bones if you got too close. We were maybe 20 feet from the side of the substation, sticking to the edge where the gravel meets the brush. That's when I saw him. A tall man, really tall, like basketball player tall, wearing this shiny silver parka with the hood up. I don't know why, but that jacket stood out immediately. Not reflective, exactly, but it caught the light in a weird way. Even in the fading sun, it looked bright, not glowing, just unnaturally clean. He was facing the chain link fence, kind of leaning in like he was checking something. In his right hand, he had this long metal rod. Looked like a car antenna or maybe one of those old signal testers, but thicker. He held it out in front of him like he was measuring something in the air. Max didn't bark. He stopped walking and just stared at the guy, ears flat, tail stiff. I thought maybe the guy was doing maintenance or checking for gas leaks or something. I called out, "Hey, do you work here?" He didn't answer, didn't even flinch. I said it louder, took a few steps closer. You okay?" He turned his head slowly, just enough that I could see part of his face under the hood. Pale. Very pale. No beard, no glasses, just this blank, tight expression. Not surprised, not angry, just watching. Then he turned fully, tucked the rod under his arm, and walked behind one of the big rectangular transformers. It was maybe 10 feet across and 6 feet tall, not huge. From where I stood, I could see both sides of it, the open space behind it and the fence beyond. But he never came out. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. Max started whining. I walked around the transformer. Nothing. No one. Nowhere he could have gone. The fence behind it ran for another 50 feet before the woods started, and it was all flat gravel in between. No door, no hatch. Just gone. I walked a full circle around the thing, checked behind the cables and boxes, even looked for a manhole or utility door. There was nothing. Max kept pulling at the leash, trying to get back toward the road. I stood there for a while, longer than I should have. I kept thinking maybe I'd missed something obvious. Maybe he crouched down, maybe there was a dip in the ground I hadn't noticed, but it was all open space and crushed gravel. You could see everything. Eventually I backed off and walked back toward the road, checking over my shoulder every few seconds. I didn't see him again, but that wasn't the end of it. 2 nights later, I walked the same route. I told myself I was being silly and probably just saw a contractor or some technician. There were no cars again, no signs, but the gate was unlocked. Max was jumpy the whole time, kept tugging the leash toward the road even before we got near the substation. As we got closer, I saw something out of place. A length of metal, maybe 3 feet, lying in the gravel near the edge of the transformer bank. I thought it might be part of a fence or a grounding rod that fell over. When I got closer, I realized it was the same rod that man had been holding. thin stainless steel or something like it, but with a plastic grip on one end. There were small markings etched along the side. No numbers, no letters, just little dashes like hash marks. I didn't touch it. I stood there for maybe a minute before I heard a soft clicking. Not loud, barely audible, like the sound of a light switch being flipped on and off, but more mechanical. It wasn't coming from the transformers, it came from somewhere to my right, near the brush. I turned fast, but there was nothing there. Then it clicked again, behind me this time. I spun around. Still nothing. I grabbed Max's leash tighter and walked back toward the road. Not fast, just steady. The clicking followed us for maybe 30 yards, always at the edge of hearing, always shifting direction like it was circling. We didn't walk that trail again. About a week later, I drove by the substation during the day. I was with a friend, Emily, and I asked her to pull over so I could check something. The rod was gone. No sign of it, no tire marks, nothing. There was a new sign zip-tied to the fence near the gate. No trespassing, authorized personnel only. I'd never seen that sign before. I work maintenance for a small wind farm in southern Idaho. Nothing fancy, 12 turbines across a few hundred acres out past the Snake River. The kind of job where it's mostly just walking up and down dirt access roads, checking panels, grease points, cables, alone most of the time. This happened back in October. I'd just switched to the evening shift to cover for a guy whose wife went into labor. That meant I was out there from 2 p.m. to around 10. Not bad hours, really. But by the time I was doing end-of-shift checks, it was pitch black. That week had been quiet. No storms, no wildlife messing with the gear. I was mostly logging numbers and running diagnostics. I carry a handheld radio out there, standard issue Motorola, so I can check in every couple hours with dispatch or call the shop if something needs more hands. We use a set of fixed channels, all programmed into the unit. On Wednesday, I was doing a loop around turbine 9 when I started picking up static. Not full white noise, just little pulses, blips, like when you barely catch a transmission too far out. It wasn't sharp or high-pitched either. Low, faint. I thought maybe someone from the highway patrol or a nearby farm was bleeding over into one of our channels. Happens now and then. I checked the signal strength, 2 bars. Weird, but not impossible. I said something into the mic, just a simple Unit 3 checking channel. But there was no response, just that same intermittent pulse. I switched channels, same thing. Static again, but not constant. It would come for a second, then cut out, then another, sometimes 2 in a row. Like breathing. Not that I thought that at the time, just the rhythm of it. It stopped after about 10 minutes. I didn't report it because nothing seemed wrong. I figured some cross-channel bleed from a long-haul trucker or a farm crew out late. The next night it happened again, this time while I was on the northeast end near Turbine 2. Different location, but same radio, same signal strength. The weird part was it didn't show up when I was transmitting, only when I was silent. I'd key the mic, speak, and it would go quiet. As soon as I released it, the static came back. This time it lasted longer. I walked around a bit to see if it was tied to a specific direction or elevation, but it followed me, moved with me. It was low, too low to really make out anything beyond the pattern, but I started recording it with the voice memo function on the radio, mostly to show my supervisor as proof I wasn't imagining things. That night when I got home, I dumped the recording onto my laptop and played it back through headphones. The file was maybe 4 minutes long. First minute was me walking and breathing, gravel crunching under my boots, basic stuff. Then the static came in. I thought it was the same pulsing until I turned up the volume and realized it wasn't just static. There was something under it. Not a voice, exactly. No words. Just breathing. But not mine. It was too slow. I know how I sound when I'm walking, especially uphill, and this wasn't that. This was deeper. Inhale, hold, exhale, like one breath every 6 or 7 seconds. Long, drawn out, steady. And it wasn't behind the static. It was buried inside it. Like the static was the breath. I stopped the file halfway through, closed my laptop, and just sat there listening to my own house for a few minutes. Nothing was wrong. No one outside. It just felt off, like I shouldn't be listening to it anymore. The next day, I brought the radio into the shop and asked if any of the techs had noticed weird interference on the evening shift. Derek, the only other guy who rotated nights, said no. He joked that maybe I was picking up some shortwave ham freaks or military stuff. I didn't tell him about the breathing. That night, I kept the radio on a different channel, one we don't normally use, channel 6. The static started up again around 9:15, right as I was wrapping up my checklist near turbine 12. This time I didn't hear the pulse. It was one long hiss, constant. Then, without touching anything, the hiss dipped in pitch, almost like a Doppler effect, but there was no movement. I looked around. No wind, no animals, nothing. I tapped the mic and said, "Unit 3, open comms. Anyone out there?" Silence. Then, after I let go of the button, another breath, louder this time. Not recorded, not in the headset. This was live through the speaker. It was the only thing I heard, just that inhale, then a long exhale. Not mechanical, but not quite human either. It sounded big, like a lung the size of a furnace. I backed away from the turbine, scanning the road and the edge of the field. I couldn't see anything past the first 10 feet. It's just empty scrub out there, no fences, no real trees, just sage and dirt and distant hills. I switched the radio off. Dead silent. I turned it back on. No static. I left an hour early that night and didn't tell anyone. Friday was my last evening shift. The guy I was covering for came back, so I was just there to help close out the week. It was uneventful until the end. I was near the battery bank on the south end when the radio kicked back to life on its own. I hadn't touched it. It flipped from channel 1 to 3, then to 5, each time just static. Then it landed back on channel 2, our main channel, and stayed there. That's when I heard my own voice. Not live, a recording. Something I'd said the day before. "Unit 3, open comms. Anyone out there?" Then the pause. Then silence. Then the breath. It repeated, exactly the same. I shut the thing off and drove back to the shop. Didn't even finish the checklist, just signed the log and left the radio on the desk. When I came in the next week for my usual day shift, I grabbed a new unit. Didn't say why. The old one's probably still sitting in the drawer. Nothing strange since then. No static, no voices. I still have the recording on my laptop, but I haven't played it again. I was driving back from a friend's place in Red Bluff to my apartment in Redding. This was last summer, early August. Hot night. The kind of heat that doesn't back off even after the sun's gone. I'd left his place around 11:20 p.m. We'd watched the Giants game, had a couple beers, nothing crazy. There's this little cutoff I use to shave time off the drive home, an old dirt back road called Old Freestone. It runs parallel to I-5 for a bit and spits you out near Cottonwood. Saves maybe 10 minutes if you catch the turns right. It's not really on any GPS anymore, but I grew up in that area and I've taken it more times than I can count. It's one of those roads with no lines, no lights, just trees and fields and fences. You take a left after a hay barn and follow it through until you hit the overpass. That night, I turned onto it like usual. The entrance was where it always was, just past a road sign half covered in vines. I checked the clock, 11:42 p.m., and figured I'd be home by midnight. I remember passing the rusted-out pickup that always sits in front of the horse pasture. I remember the first bend, the leaning mailbox with the bullet hole, even the dip in the road where my Civic always bottoms out if I don't brake. Same as always. But then things stopped lining up. The curve near the dry creek bed came up way too fast. It's supposed to be past a short cattle gate on the right, but I hadn't seen that gate. I slowed down and checked my mirrors, thinking maybe I missed a turn, but there's only one road out there. One way in, one way through. I figured I was just tired and pushed on. A few minutes later, I passed that same rusted-out pickup again. Same dents in the side, same missing tailgate, same red rope tied to the fence post beside it. At that point, I slowed way down. I looked around. The fence line was familiar, the tree line too, but I knew I hadn't turned around. I hadn't even passed an intersection. The road just looped. I stopped the car completely and killed the engine, just sat there with the windows down, listening. Crickets, a distant hum of power lines. Nothing unusual. After a minute or two, I started the car and kept driving. I told myself I must have made a wrong turn somehow, ended up on a parallel road or something. I wasn't panicking yet. Then I saw the mailbox with the bullet hole again. Same letters, same dent on the top. I checked my phone. No signal, but that's normal for that stretch. The time said 11:51. I'd been on that road for 9 minutes, but it felt longer. I pulled over again and got out this time. Walked around a little, trying to spot a landmark or something that might help. It was dead quiet. No bugs chirping anymore. Just this heavy stillness. I could hear my own breathing like I had earmuffs on. I got back in the car and started driving again, slower this time, watching everything. After another 5 or 6 minutes, I passed the same rusted pickup again. I didn't even try to explain it to myself that time. I just kept going. The sky felt off. There were stars out, but not as many as there should have been. It was like a dome overhead instead of an open sky. One bright one kept catching my eye, just over the tree line. It didn't blink, just hovered. I thought it might be a tower light or a plane at first, but it never moved. The road kept going. Same curve, same bump, same pickup. I turned the wheel hard and went off the dirt road onto the grass at one point, trying to force myself out of the loop. Drove parallel to the fence until I hit a dry ditch, then bounced back onto the road again. Still the same. Eventually, I stopped trying to steer it. I don't know how long I was driving, but it felt like at least 45 minutes. Then something changed. I saw headlights up ahead just for a second, coming around the bend facing toward me, then gone. No sound. No car passed me. Just a brief flash, like someone flipped on high beams and cut them again. I stopped the car and waited. Nothing came. No engine noise, no light. After a couple minutes, I kept going. But this time, the road sloped differently. I could tell right away there was a small hill I didn't remember being there before. It crested, and then I saw the overpass lights. Real ones, yellow sodium glow. The road leveled out and dumped me onto the I-5 on-ramp. Exactly where it always should have. My hands were shaking. I pulled off at the first gas station I saw, near Bowman Road. Walked in and bought a bottle of water just to ground myself. The cashier was sweeping the floor and gave me a nod like nothing was weird. I asked what time it was. He pointed to the clock above the counter. 12:03 a.m. The whole thing had lasted maybe 20 minutes, tops. My phone showed one missed call from my friend at 11:54. No weird gaps, no time jumps. But I swear to you, I drove that same quarter-mile stretch of road for nearly an hour. I was driving through southern Nevada, headed toward Ridgecrest to see my brother. I'd left late on purpose to avoid the heat. August in the desert's brutal, even after dark, and I'd planned to drive through the night and crash at his place in the morning. It was somewhere between Beatty and the Nevada-California line, just past midnight. Clear sky, no moon. The road was empty, just me and whatever scattered truckers were out. I'd taken the 95 south and then turned off onto a smaller state highway. I can't remember the number. It was one of those roads with nothing around for miles. No streetlights, no gas stations. Just open desert and some low hills in the distance. I wasn't tired yet. I had a thermos of gas station coffee and the radio going. It was one of those public radio stations that fades in and out, playing weird jazz one minute and some late-night caller show the next. The signal was weak, but it helped pass the time. I remember I'd just passed a rusted mile marker, something like mile 143, when I saw the lights. But not headlights. About a quarter mile ahead to the right side of the road, I noticed 3 faint red dots. They were low to the ground at first, like taillights, but not quite. They were too dim. Then they started moving, fast, diagonally, like they were crossing the road. As I got closer, I realized they weren't taillights at all. They were brake lights. 3 black SUVs, identical shape and size, driving in a tight line about 50 yards off the road. The weird part was, they didn't have headlights on. Just the red brake lights, faint like they were covered in dust. No engine noise either, and in the middle of the desert with no other cars around, you'd hear them if they were there. They were driving parallel with me, moving fast but smooth, like they were pacing me, all in sync. No drifting or bumping, just perfectly spaced, maybe 10 feet between each. I slowed down a little without meaning to. My radio cut out right then. Total static. Not even the buzzing kind. Just flatline dead. And as soon as that happened, all 3 SUVs suddenly peeled off in the exact same motion. No turning, no gradual curve, just straight 90-degree turns into the desert like someone had pulled a string. No dust kicked up. No tire ruts. Just smooth motion into open sand. I passed the spot where they'd veered off maybe 5 seconds later. I looked out my window, expecting to see them bouncing along some unmarked trail, but there was nothing there. No lights, no shape, no motion. I slowed to about 20 miles per hour and scanned the darkness. I could see maybe 100 feet out with my brights on. Nothing but low brush and flat sand. Then my dashboard flickered. Just once. Fast, like a surge. That's when I felt the weirdest part. I don't know how to explain it exactly. It wasn't cold or anything physical, but something changed in the air, like stepping into a pressure drop or a place you weren't supposed to be. I sped up after that, not flooring it, just back to normal highway speed. The radio stayed dead for a few more minutes before it crackled back in with a burst of static and then a guy's voice mid-sentence, like nothing had happened. I kept looking in the rearview mirror for a while, but the road behind me was pitch black. About 20 minutes later, I reached a tiny all-night gas station. Not much more than a pump and a shack. I pulled in to top off and went inside to use the bathroom and grab a snack. There was a guy behind the counter, maybe in his 60s, reading a newspaper, no one else around. I asked him, just making conversation, "Hey, you ever see black SUVs out here? Like driving with no lights?" He looked up for a second, didn't say anything, then went back to his paper. I paid in cash and left. When I drove back that way 2 days later, I slowed down near the same stretch. In daylight, the spot where they turned off was just flat desert. No tracks, no trail, nothing. I never saw them again. I was out back behind my house, flying my drone just like I usually do after dinner. The sky was clear, and it was one of those late summer evenings where the air felt warm but not sticky. I remember it was just before dusk, maybe 8:15 or so, because the streetlights hadn't come on yet, and the sun was just starting to dip below the horizon. My name's Nate, I'm 17, and I've been into drones for a couple of years now. Nothing fancy, just a standard quadcopter I saved up for and bought last summer. I know a lot of people in my neighborhood fly drones too, but I mostly keep to myself when I'm outside. It's sort of my thing. That night, I was practicing some tricks over the field behind my house. It's just an empty lot, mostly grass with a few scraggly trees, and it's quiet out there. The drone's camera was live on my phone, and I was flying it around, trying to get a better grip on hovering steady and pulling off smooth turns. It's not easy, but I liked the challenge. After a few minutes, I noticed something strange. Up above my drone, maybe 100 feet higher, there was another drone. I didn't see it at first. Well, not really. But then I caught it moving slowly across the sky behind mine. What caught my attention was that it had no lights on. Usually drones have little blinking LEDs for visibility, especially after sunset, right? This one didn't have any. It was also completely silent. No buzzing, no mechanical hum, nothing. My drone made the usual noise, so I was sure it wasn't part of mine or a glitch in the feed. I looked up directly, but I couldn't see it clearly with my eyes, just that vague shape hanging there in the darkening sky. I tried flying my drone closer to it to get a better look. As I moved mine toward where the second drone was hovering, it stayed in place, just barely shifting position to keep the same distance above me. It was weirdly deliberate, like it was tracking me or watching, but it never got closer. The drone kept this behavior for almost 20 minutes. I didn't want to freak out, so I kept telling myself maybe it was someone else's drone, maybe some new model that's quieter than usual, or had lights off to be stealthy or something. But it was getting harder to ignore the feeling that it wasn't normal. Finally, I decided to land mine. I brought it down slowly over the grass, and as soon as it touched the ground, I looked up to see if the other drone would leave too. It didn't. It just hovered in place, completely still, maybe 200 feet above me now, not moving except for the occasional slight drift with the breeze. That's when it got really strange. I sat down on the grass and watched for a while. The sky was darker now, and the stars were starting to come out. The second drone stayed exactly where it was. No blinking, no noise, just hanging in the air like it was waiting. An hour passed. My phone battery was dying from the drone feed, and my parents were calling me inside, but I didn't want to leave it alone. I just kept staring at that black shape against the stars. wondering what it was or why it was there. Then, without warning, it shot straight up into the sky. Not slowly, but faster than any drone I'd ever seen. It disappeared into the darkness in a few seconds, like it vanished. I sat there for a minute after it was gone, feeling a bit stupid for being so worked up. I packed up my drone, walked inside, and told my parents I was ready for bed. That night, I kept thinking about it. I checked online to see if anyone else had reported something similar, but I couldn't find anything. The whole thing didn't make sense. Why hover so close for so long, then leave like that? I never saw that drone again, and I haven't flown mine at night since. Sometimes when I'm outside and the sky's clear, I look up at the stars, half expecting to see it back. But it's just the quiet night sky. And me. My girlfriend, Anna and I were camping near Dolly Sods in West Virginia last October. We'd found a quiet ridge off the main trail, a little over 4 miles in. It wasn't an official site, but there was a flat enough patch of grass with a good windbreak from the trees. It overlooked the next hill to the east, probably a 1/4 mile across the little valley, maybe 500 feet higher. It had that bald look some of those ridges get, just rock and scrub. We got there late afternoon, set up the tent, cooked a little, watched the light change. It was crisp but not cold yet, maybe mid-40s after sunset. Clear sky, no moon. Stars were insane. Anna fell asleep around 10:30. I stayed up for a while in my sleeping bag, just reading on my Kindle and listening to the wind in the trees. A little before midnight, I noticed everything had gone quiet, like someone had flipped a switch. No wind, no bugs. Even the distant sound of water from the creek was gone. I sat up and unzipped the tent flap. There was a faint light coming from over the ridge across from us. Not bright, kind of a soft glow, bluish white. It wasn't moving, just hanging there maybe 50 feet above the hilltop, like fog with a backlight. At first I thought it might be headlights or someone camping up there with a lantern. But it didn't make sense. There's no trail to that hilltop, and nothing was moving. The light wasn't steady either. It was pulsing, slow, almost like breathing. About every 3 seconds it would dim, then brighten again. I got out of the tent and just stood there, watching it. It wasn't rising or falling. It just hung there, shimmering a little, almost the shape of a jellyfish, but huge, probably 100 feet wide. No sound at all, no insects. The air felt wrong. Stale, I guess. I woke Anna up gently, just whispered her name and told her not to freak out. She came outside with me, groggy and barefoot. The look on her face when she saw it kind of made it real for me. She didn't say anything at first, just grabbed my arm. We watched it for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. The pulsing got a little faster, still soft, like a heartbeat. Then it started to recede, not up, not sideways, just pulling back somehow, like fog being sucked inward. It left behind this haze that lingered just above the trees. Then that faded too. A few seconds later, the wind came back. Light breeze. Then we heard the creak again. Then the first cricket chirped. Anna went back in the tent. She didn't want to talk. I stayed up. The next morning, we hiked over there. We didn't really plan it. Just packed up camp and headed toward the hilltop. No trail, just bushwhacked across the saddle and up through the brush. The closer we got, the more the trees thinned out. And at the top, where the mist had been, everything was black. Not burnt, exactly, just dead, like something had leached the color out of the ground. The grass was flat and brittle. The soil had a smell to it, like old batteries or burnt plastic. We didn't find any footprints, no fire pit, nothing like someone had camped there. There was one tree, a small birch, maybe 10 feet tall. The side facing where the mist had hovered was scorched. Not the whole tree, just one face of it, like it had been hit by a blast of heat in a single direction. The bark was blackened, curled. Anna didn't want to stay up there. We turned around and got back on the trail by early afternoon. Neither of us talked much that day. We cut the trip short and drove home that evening. She doesn't bring it up anymore. I haven't been back. I was doing a solo backpacking loop through the San Juan Mountains last summer. Nothing extreme, just 4 days, 3 nights, mostly sticking to the CDT spur near Silverton. I'd done parts of it before with friends, but this time I wanted to do it alone, just disconnect for a bit. The first 2 days were perfect. Sunny, Dry, not too hot. A couple other hikers now and then, but mostly I was by myself. I camped off trail the second night in a little meadow near a creek. Didn't even need a fire, just ate, stretched, and crashed early. The third day, I took a side trail I hadn't planned on. I'd read about a small lake called Buckhorn, about 5 miles off the main route. It added a bit of distance, but I had enough food and figured I could make it back to the trail by late evening. I wanted to swim. The path out there was rough, narrow, and steep in parts. Overgrown, clearly not used much. At one point, I had to duck under a big fallen pine that had collapsed across the trail. After maybe 2 hours, I reached this stretch of trail that curved along a ridge, thick spruce on both sides. That's when I noticed the quiet. Not just calm, quiet, like someone had hit mute on the whole forest. No birds, no bugs, no wind in the trees, nothing. It was strange, but not immediately scary. I figured maybe it was the time of day or something about the elevation. I stopped to drink some water and looked around. The air felt heavy, like the inside of a closed room. No breeze, no movement. I pulled out my phone, not for signal, just to check the GPS map and see how far I was from the lake. I had downloaded the topo offline. It took a second to load, which was odd because it shouldn't have. The map came up, but the little blue dot showing my location was drifting, like I was moving when I wasn't. Then I noticed the compass. It was spinning, just slowly rotating, even though I was standing still. I watched it make a full circle, then another, then it just froze, pointing due west. I turned in place, and it stayed locked on west no matter how I moved. I took a step forward, and the needle jumped, spun halfway around, then froze again. I stepped back, just one pace, and suddenly everything felt normal, like a switch flipped. The air shifted, I heard wind again, the trees rustled, a bird called out nearby. I stepped forward again. Dead silence, compass spinning. I stepped back, normal. That's when I got a little freaked out. I marked the edge with a rock. Stepped in, waited, same thing. Compass spun once, then froze. No sound, no wind. Out again, everything returned. I tried holding the phone at arm's length while moving forward. The moment my foot crossed into that patch, silence. I kept doing this for maybe 5 minutes, just pacing back and forth, testing it. The patch was maybe 20 feet wide, not visible, just something you felt, like the forest held its breath in that one spot. Eventually, I decided to keep moving. I told myself it was a fluke, maybe a magnetic deposit under the ground or something, but I was on edge the rest of the way. About half a mile later, I reached Buckhorn Lake. Beautiful spot, clear water, surrounded by cliffs and pines. But I didn't swim. I felt weird, like I was being watched, but not from any direction. Just a general pressure. I filtered some water, ate a snack, and didn't stay long. On the hike back to the main trail, I passed the same patch, but took a wider line around it off the trail a bit. I didn't feel anything that time. I camped that night back on the CDT. Didn't sleep much. The next day, once I had signal again, I opened the compass app just to test. It worked fine. Calibrated normally, never spun again. I didn't tell anyone for a while. I didn't really know how to describe it. Nothing happened. I didn't see anything. But that part of the forest, it wasn't empty. It just wasn't right. I was out in the fields behind my cousin Jeremy's place in central Kansas. August, right around the peak of the Perseids. He'd gone back inside to grab a couple of beers, and I was out there with my camera on a tripod, just messing around with some long exposures. The sky was crystal clear, no moon, barely any haze. Real dark sky kind of night, not something you get often unless you're miles from a town. Jeremy's land backs up to about 300 acres of nothing, just wheat fields and some scrubby trees in the distance. The nearest neighbor is probably a 15-minute drive. I'd set up facing northeast. ISO 800, f2.8, 20-second exposures, just letting the shutter go every few seconds while I leaned on the hood of his truck. It was quiet, just crickets and the occasional rustle of wind in the grass. Perfect night for this kind of thing. I remember seeing 3 or 4 really bright meteors in the first half hour. Nothing unusual, but solid ones with long trails. Jeremy came back out around then, handed me a bottle, and we sat on the tailgate talking while the camera clicked away. At one point, I caught something move in the corner of my eye. Bright, sharp, but it didn't streak across like the meteors. It came in fast, diagonally across the northern sky. and then just stopped, like someone slammed the brakes on it. We both noticed it. It wasn't flashing like a plane, it wasn't fading like a meteor. It was a white dot way up there, but completely still. I remember Jeremy saying that's weird, but real calm, like he didn't want to sound stupid by pointing it out too much. We watched it. It didn't move for a good 2, maybe 3 minutes. Then, just as suddenly, it winked out. No fade, no shift, just gone. I walked over to the camera and checked the preview screen. I scrolled back through the shots, looking for the one that might have caught that light. They all looked normal, stars, faint meteor trails, grainy but clear, until one frame that wouldn't load. The thumbnail was black with a weird red line through it. When I tapped it, the screen just froze. I had to power the camera off and back on. That shot was gone, just corrupted. The one before and after were fine, normal. I didn't think much of it in the moment. We figured maybe it was a satellite or some kind of camera glitch. The beer helped keep things casual. But later, when I loaded the card onto my laptop back at the house, that one file wouldn't open at all. The rest, about 80 photos, were fine. That missing frame should have had the object. It was snapped during the moment we saw it. Same angle, same patch of sky. I tried recovery tools, different software, nothing worked. Just that one file, corrupted beyond repair. The next day, Jeremy asked if I thought it was a drone, but we didn't hear anything, and this thing was way too high and fast. No red or green lights, no buzzing. I didn't have a theory, and I still don't. Just that one night, one strange light, and one photo that refused to exist. I was walking the old levee trail behind my neighborhood in eastern Missouri. It runs along the edge of the Mississippi, just outside of town. I'd been doing the same loop a few times a week after dinner. Nothing serious, just trying to get out and move around a little. This was early September last year. Around 8:30 p.m., the sun had set maybe 20 minutes earlier, and there was that kind of quiet where the sky's still a bit blue, but everything else is dark. Crickets were going. Humid, but not unbearable. I had my hands in my jacket pockets and wasn't listening to anything. I don't usually wear headphones at night. Don't like being surprised, I guess. Anyway, I just passed the turnoff near the water treatment plant. There's a big clearing there where the trees thin out and the view opens up toward the river. It's usually dead quiet. You can hear frogs sometimes, or the distant drone of a barge engine. Out of nowhere, everything went white. Not lightning, not even close. The sky lit up with this hard white light, like someone set off a camera flash that filled the entire sky. It lasted maybe 2-3 seconds tops, bright enough that it washed everything out, the trees, the path, even my own hands. And then it was gone. No sound. That's the part that stuck with me the most. No boom, no echo, no rumble, just total silence. I stood there waiting for something to happen. A second flash, maybe thunder, but it didn't come. Instead, the air just sort of bent. It started high up, maybe 200 feet off the ground, above the tree line. The best way I can describe it is like heat distortion on pavement, but vertical and moving. A shimmer. It rippled once, wide like a curtain, and then again slower. Still no sound. No animals either. The crickets had stopped, no wind, everything was still. I just stood there watching the air shimmer, thinking maybe a transformer blew or something exploded miles away, and the sound just hadn't reached me yet. I even turned around expecting a rush of air or a shockwave, but it never came. The distortion faded after maybe 10 seconds, like it evaporated. I waited another minute, then started walking again. Slower this time. I felt watched, I guess. Not by a person, just a feeling. About 5 minutes later, I passed a small footbridge near the creek inlet. There's a motion sensor light there, hooked up to some maintenance shed, and it popped on as I approached. But then it flickered and buzzed, like the bulb was dying, and shut off again before I got halfway across. It stayed off. The path curves after the bridge, and I could see all the way down toward the fishing pier. There were 3 lights lining the trail on that stretch, solar-powered ones. All of them were dead. Normally they'd be dim, but they weren't even glowing. Just dark. I don't know why that rattled me so much, but it did. I picked up my pace and cut the loop short, turning back toward town. When I got home, I half expected to see something on the news or Facebook. Maybe others saw it too. But nothing. No mention of it from anyone. The next morning, I stopped by the bait shop near the river to grab coffee. I asked Gary, the guy who runs it, if he saw anything weird in the sky the night before. He shook his head, said it was quiet. He'd closed up at 7. I tried not to sound too strange describing it, just said I'd seen a bright flash and was wondering if it was a storm. He looked at me for a second, then said, "You sure it wasn't a drone?" I said, "Yeah, I was sure." That was the end of it. The following week, I went back on the trail during the day to see if anything looked different. Nothing did. But the solar lights along that curve were still dead. I was out chasing storms again that July afternoon, somewhere near Dodge City, Kansas. I'd been doing this for a few years, watching weather, chasing cells, trying to get good footage or photos, whatever. Nothing crazy, just a hobby that got me driving hours at a time, sometimes sitting out in the middle of nowhere watching the sky change. That day started out normal, even a bit slow. The forecast showed some scattered thunderstorms rolling through, but nothing too intense or organized. The wind was steady and warm, around 85 degrees, with that heavy summer air hanging low. I parked on the side of a dirt road just outside town, about a mile from a small farmstead, and set up my camera gear on the hood of my truck. The sky was mostly clear, with some clouds moving pretty fast, pushed by a strong southwesterly wind. The clouds themselves were the usual stuff: thin cirrus and some puffy cumulus gathering in the distance, the kind you expect before a thunderstorm. Then, out of nowhere, I noticed something off. One cloud, a small grayish one about the size of a large van, just sat still. The others all moved at a good clip, racing east with the wind, but this one wasn't moving at all. Not a millimeter. At first, I thought maybe it was a trick of perspective, or maybe it was anchored to something like a hill or a rising current of air, but there were no hills nearby, just flat fields and low scrub. The cloud hovered low, maybe 500 feet off the ground, definitely below the other clouds. What made it even weirder was the sky around it, completely clear, no clouds or haze. Yet lightning was flickering in the blue sky all around the still cloud. No thunderstorm overhead, just these brief, sharp white flashes like static electricity dancing through the air. I stood there, squinting up at the sky. The lightning wasn't the kind you usually see during storms, no big bolts or forks. Just little, quick flickers, like the crackle from a Van de Graaff generator or the static you get from a TV screen that's not tuned right. The air felt different, too. It was heavy, almost charged. I swear I could feel a tiny tingling on my skin and hair standing up on my arms. It was subtle. Not like the shock you get from touching a metal doorknob, but enough to make me pause. I grabbed my handheld anemometer, one of those small devices that measures wind speed, to check the wind near the ground. It read steady at 15 miles per hour. Then I pointed it up at the cloud. Nothing. The cloud stayed absolutely still. The wind was moving the other clouds at a solid 20 to 25 miles per hour. I double-checked the weather app on my phone, and the radar showed no unusual activity in the area. The storm cells were still miles away. I took a video with my phone, trying to capture the flickering lightning around the cloud and the fact it wasn't moving like the others. The camera picked up the flashes clearly, but oddly, when I played it back, the sound was just background wind noise. No crackles or static at all. That was the first strange thing. I waited for a while, watching the cloud. It was motionless for at least 15 minutes, maybe closer to 20. The other clouds drifted by fast, changing shape and moving along. This one stayed like a frozen blotch against the sky. The air charge grew heavier, or at least it felt that way. My hair stood up more, and there was this quiet buzzing noise in my ears, like when you're near power lines, but softer, almost imperceptible. Then, without warning, the cloud blinked out. It didn't drift away or evaporate gradually. It just vanished. 1 second it was there, the next it wasn't, like someone switched off a light. The spot in the sky where the cloud had been stayed perfectly clear and blue, but the strange flickering lightning kept happening, now all around the empty space. I blinked, stared, half expecting the cloud to reappear or for something else to happen, but nothing did. I sat back in the driver's seat, heart racing a bit, trying to make sense of it. The sky was calm again, the normal wind returned, and the usual hum of cicadas and distant trucks came back into focus. I started the engine and drove back toward town, but the feeling stuck with me. That spot in the sky, the silence of the cloud, the electric charge, none of it fit any weather pattern or storm behavior I'd seen before. Later, I checked my video again on my laptop. The cloud stillness was obvious and the flickering lights showed up, but the sound was always normal wind noise. Nothing electric, nothing strange. I tried calling a few meteorologists I knew, but they just shrugged or said maybe it was a weird, isolated weather effect or a small thermal bubble. Maybe it was. But I can't shake the way the cloud just stayed frozen, how the air buzzed with static and how it disappeared like it ever existed. That's all I have. No big boom, no lights in the sky, just that one motionless cloud and a silent, charged calm around it. I was out hiking alone in the foothills of the Cascades one weekend in late October. My name's Eric, and I usually spend my weekends in the woods just to get away from everything. That area isn't popular or heavily trafficked, mostly locals and some hunters, and the weather was crisp but dry, the kind that makes the leaves snap underfoot and the air feel sharp. I parked at the trailhead early afternoon. The sun was low but still bright, making the colors of the forest pop. Orange, red, brown, that kind of fall vibe. I was carrying a small pack with the usual stuff: water, snacks, a camera, my keys, and a multi-tool on my belt. I'm a bit old school, so I also had a compass, though I rarely had to use it. I started down a familiar trail that I've taken a few times before, but I wanted to explore a little farther than usual. About an hour in, I pulled out my compass to check my direction, planning to turn back soon. But the needle was spinning wildly like a busted toy. I stopped and stared, thinking maybe it was just broken. I shook it gently, but it kept spinning in circles. That struck me as weird. I figured I must be near some kind of interference, maybe old mining equipment or buried metal. I looked around for anything out of place, but the trail was pretty natural. A few rocks, some fallen logs, the usual stuff. No power lines, no metal fences, nothing that would explain the compass acting up. Curious, I pulled out my keys and multi-tool and held them loosely in my hand. Both of them started to tug ever so slightly toward one side. Nothing strong, but definitely a pull, like something was quietly pulling them along the trail. I noticed my belt buckle was doing the same thing. That's when I realized I was being pulled off the marked path onto a narrower side trail I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't on my map. The weird tugging got stronger the further I went down it, like a magnetic pull drawing me in. The light was dimming as the trees thickened. The air grew still, and the usual sounds of the forest, birds, wind, squirrels, just stopped. The silence was total. I stopped and listened, but it was like the forest had held its breath. At this point, I was feeling uneasy, but I figured maybe it was just a weird natural phenomenon. I pulled out my camera, a decent DSLR I always carry, thinking maybe I'd catch some shots of the fading light through the leaves. But when I pressed the power button, nothing happened. The screen stayed black, no sound, no light. I tried the battery compartment, thinking it might be loose, but everything was fine. The camera just wouldn't turn on. I tried switching it off and on again, hoping it was a glitch. Still nothing. I even pulled out my phone to see if maybe that would work as a backup light source or camera, but the screen flickered weirdly and then went dark. By now, the trail was barely visible, covered in thick layers of leaves and broken branches. The feeling of being watched crept up on me, but there was no one there, just the dead silence pressing in. I wanted to turn back, but every time I tried to retrace my steps, the tugging on my keys and belt buckle shifted to a different direction, like the trail was moving, or maybe I was walking in circles. I'd look up and feel like I was losing sense of where north was, even though I'd started with the compass. After what felt like a long time, maybe an hour or so, I reached a small clearing. The trees here were tall, but their branches were all bare, no leaves at all. The ground was covered in a thick layer of pine needles, completely muffling footsteps. The silence was even deeper here, like the air was holding itself still. I raised my camera again and tried to turn it on. Nothing. The phone wouldn't power on either. I sat down on a fallen log, trying to calm myself and figure out what was going on. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, though the air wasn't cold exactly, just heavy. I kept hearing a faint, barely there humming sound, almost like the wind, but there was no wind. It was steady and soft, coming from all around me. It felt wrong, unnatural. I looked back down the trail I'd come in on, but the trees looked denser now, like a wall. The path seemed to disappear, swallowed by the forest. I started walking again, this time following the tug on my keys and belt buckle, hoping they'd lead me out. The trail bent and twisted unnaturally, and the forest seemed to close in tighter. The whole time, the humming stayed with me, steady, low, and constant. I couldn't find any source for it. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably closer to 30 minutes, I emerged back onto the main trail. The compass stopped spinning, the tugging on my stuff disappeared. The birds started chirping again. I took a deep breath and checked my camera. It powered on normally, no problem. My phone lit up with notifications from the time I'd been gone. The sun was just setting now, and the forest looked ordinary again, full of life and sound. I didn't take any pictures on that side trail. I didn't tell anyone at first because it sounded crazy, like I'd gotten lost or imagined the whole thing. But it stuck with me, how everything stopped, how the compass spun, and how the metal things pulled me deeper into that silent patch of forest. I went back a week later in daylight, hoping to find the trail and figure out what was going on. The side trail was barely visible, overgrown and blending in with the rest of the woods. No humming, no compass issues, nothing. I don't know what that place was or what I walked into, but I'm sure something was there. Something that made the forest stop, made my gear act weird, and held me there longer than I realized. I kept hiking after that, but I never went down that trail again. I was camping alone on the edge of a lake up in northern Minnesota, somewhere close to the Boundary Waters. I'd been out there a few times before, but this trip was supposed to be a quiet getaway. No distractions, just me, my gear, and the wilderness. I set up camp in a little clearing, maybe 50 yards from the water. The lake itself was calm that night, flat like glass, and the sky was mostly clear except for a thin layer of clouds drifting by. It was late fall, so the air was crisp, the kind of cold that makes your breath hang in the air like smoke. After dinner, I sat by the fire, staring at the lake, just letting the silence settle in. That's when I noticed the first flicker. It was faint, almost like a candle flame, but too high up and too steady to be from a campfire or a boat. I looked closer and saw a pattern of tiny lights hovering over the water, maybe 100 yards from shore. They were arranged in a perfect grid, like rows and columns, evenly spaced, but each light flickered independently, kind of like old bulbs on a string that were slowly dying. The weird part was the pattern wasn't fixed. The grid shifted very slowly, rearranging itself bit by bit over the course of an hour. It wasn't random, but it didn't form any clear shapes or letters either. Just this faint, steady glow that moved, stretched, then pulled back, always staying suspended silently over the lake. At first, I thought it was some kind of fishing equipment or maybe reflections from a distant marina, but the nearest marina was miles away and nothing around matched the regularity of the grid. I didn't hear any motors or noises, just the usual sounds of water lapping against the shore and the occasional call of a loon. I tried taking photos with my phone, but they all came out blurry or with weird static that wasn't there in real life. I reset the camera, checked the lens, but it was fine otherwise. I figured maybe the low light was messing with it. The light stayed like that for hours, shifting slowly, but never changing brightness or color. No flashes, no beams, just that faint pulsing glow. I kept watching, half expecting them to go away or change somehow, but they stayed calm and steady. Around 2 a.m., a thick fog rolled in from the lake, softening the edges of the lights until they became even more ghostly. The grid pattern blurred, the lights merging and separating as if they were underwater bubbles. I sat still, feeling a bit on edge, but not exactly scared, just confused. Then, right before dawn, the whole grid just vanished. No flicker, no fade out, nothing. It was like someone flipped a switch, and the lake was completely dark again. I stayed up for a while longer, trying to make sense of it, but nothing else happened. I didn't hear any strange sounds or see anything moving. Just the usual early morning noises, birds waking up, wind in the trees. The next day, I hiked around the shore, looking for anything unusual. No footprints, no equipment, no wires or structures that could explain the lights. The shoreline was undisturbed except for my own tracks. I packed up that afternoon and drove home, thinking about what I'd seen. I checked online, tried to find anything about strange lights in that area. Nothing came up. No reports of drones, fishermen, or light shows. I'm still not sure what those lights were. They didn't feel threatening or weird in a sci-fi way, just strange. Like something was watching or communicating silently, but not in a way I could understand. I've told a few friends, but mostly kept quiet. I guess it sounds crazy, but I know what I saw. That grid of flickering lights, drifting and changing over the lake and then disappearing before dawn. My name's Levi Kincaid, and I've been trapping around the gates of the Arctic for a good dozen years now. I'm from Fairbanks originally, but this patch of wilderness, somewhere near the Noatak River, is where I've always worked during the winter. It's a tough country, but I like the solitude. Most folks don't go this far out unless they're used to it. It's quiet, too quiet sometimes. That last run I made, I was checking my traps over 3 days, spread out along a stretch of spruce and birch. The weather was colder than usual, biting wind that made your nose sting through your balaclava. I carried my usual gear, steel traps, bait, a couple of snares, and my old Winchester. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary, just hoping to catch enough for a good payday come spring. On the second day, I noticed something odd right off the bat. One of my traps, the one I set near a small creek bed, was smashed. Not just sprung, but bent out of shape, almost like someone tried to rip it out and dropped it in a hurry. The bait, which I'd carefully wrapped in fish skins to keep it fresh, was untouched. That stuck me right away. Usually, if a trap gets busted, the bait's gone too. Not this time. It was just sitting there, like whatever came by didn't want to touch it. I checked the other traps and found 2 more with the same treatment. Broken frames, bait left alone. Around those spots, the snow was disturbed in strange ways. Tracks didn't match anything I'd seen before, not wolf, bear, or wolverine. They were deeper and wider, but the pattern was irregular, almost like the thing that left them was limping, or maybe hopping. I sat down on a fallen log and stared at those prints for a good long while. My mind was racing through possibilities. Maybe some big moose crashed through, or a ravenous wolverine that decided to break traps for fun. But none of that made full sense. I had my radio with me, but signal was spotty, and I didn't want to waste battery calling in for nothing. So I kept moving, finishing my rounds with a tight knot in my stomach. That evening, back at camp, I built a fire and tried to shake the feeling that something was off. The sun was setting early now, and the sky was that deep, cold blue you only get this far north in late fall. The wind died down, and the trees stood motionless, like they were waiting. Then I saw it. At first, it was a faint glow just above the treetops, flickering slow and steady. I figured it was just my eyes playing tricks after a long day. But the light grew, pulsing in a rhythm that didn't match any radio code or emergency signal I knew. It was greenish, with a touch of amber, and it spread across the horizon in waves, like a living thing breathing. I grabbed my binoculars, aiming toward the glow. There was no plane, no satellite, no helicopter. The sky was clear and full of stars, Orion and the Big Dipper hanging low. But this light, it moved against the wind, slow and deliberate, like it was searching. I reached for the radio to try to report what I was seeing, but the static came first, a hiss that quickly turned into soft murmurs. Voices, but nothing English or any language I recognized. They didn't form words I could catch, just patterns of sounds that seemed almost musical, like someone humming underwater. The hair on the back of my neck prickled, and I lowered the radio. I wasn't sure if it was a trick of the equipment or something else entirely. I sat by the fire, watching the light pulse on and off, each wave slower than the last, like a heartbeat. Around midnight, the wind picked up again, stirring the snow in little swirls. The light vanished as suddenly as it came, leaving the sky darker than before. I checked my traps again, just in case. Nothing was disturbed this time, not even fresh tracks. The next morning, I found more traps broken in the same way, bait untouched. The tracks were there too, leading away from camp in a path that made no sense, zigzagging through the trees before disappearing near a ridge. I packed up fast after that. The unease was creeping in full force. As I hiked out, I kept glancing back at the ridge, half expecting to see those lights again or something watching from the tree line. I didn't see the lights again, not that trip. But every time I check my traps now, even closer to town, I can't shake the feeling that something's there. Watching. Careful not to cross a line. And the strangest part? My radio still picks up those murmurs sometimes. Static voices that don't belong to anyone. Just a faint reminder that whatever was out there didn't want me to find it, but wasn't ready to leave either. My name's Eric Halverson, and I run a small wildlife research outfit near the Yukon River, just outside of Eagle, Alaska. I'm mostly in charge of maintaining the trail cameras we set up to monitor critters, moose, wolves, the usual. Nothing fancy, just your run-of-the-mill remote cameras that snap a few photos or a short clip whenever they catch motion. I'm used to the usual suspects wandering through, deer nibbling on willows, foxes darting by, maybe a lynx if I'm lucky. But what I caught one late fall had me scratching my head for weeks. I don't remember exactly when the trouble started, but I noticed the first oddities in the footage around early October. It was getting dark early, the river was starting to ice over, and I was spending more nights out checking cameras. One spot we'd been monitoring for months, a little clearing by a beaver dam, showed something strange. The first clip was short, only a few seconds. I pulled it up on my laptop back at the cabin. The image was grainy, nothing unusual except for a shadowy figure in the corner. At first, I thought it was just a moose or maybe a lanky dog, but the way it moved didn't add up. It wasn't bounding or trotting like any four-legged animal I knew. Instead, it glided, smooth and deliberate, limbs stretching out longer than anything natural. It moved almost like a shadow puppet, but without the jerky stop-start that most critters show on camera. It was too fluid. What really got me was the way the footage glitched every time the thing got close to the camera. The image would warp, distort like a bad TV signal. It wasn't your usual camera malfunction. This was different, almost like the figure's presence was interfering with the recording. Weird, right? I've been around electronics in the bush long enough to know the difference between busted gear and something else messing with it. After I spotted that clip, I started checking the other cameras nearby. Nothing like that showed up anywhere else, just that one spot. I went out during the day to check it myself, looking for tracks or anything disturbed, broken twigs, footprints, animal scat. But there was nothing. The snow and fallen leaves were untouched, like no one or nothing had been there at all. It didn't track through the clearing, it just appeared on the footage. I figured maybe the camera was picking up some sort of natural optical illusion. Could be the low autumn sun playing tricks through the trees or a weird combination of shadows, but even then, it didn't explain the glitches or the figure's unnatural movement. I told my buddy Jake about it when he came by one afternoon. Jake's a biologist and has been working in the Yukon for years. I showed him the footage and watched his face while I played it back. He was quiet for a while, then shrugged. "Might be some kind of animal nobody's cataloged yet," he said. "But if that's the case, we should be seeing tracks or signs somewhere." We agreed to put up some extra cameras closer together around that clearing, hoping to get a better look. Over the next week, the new cameras collected more clips. The figure showed up again, always at night. I stayed at the cabin most nights, poring over footage. There was something about how it moved, elongated limbs sweeping silently through the underbrush, gliding without a sound. It didn't run, it didn't jump, it just moved, like it was sliding through a dream. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of a shape, almost human but wrong. No eyes, no clear face, just an outline that shifted and shimmered just beyond focus. And each time it got near a camera, the footage glitched more severely. The colors bled and blurred, the image stuttered, then froze before cutting out. It wasn't like the usual glitches either. None of the cameras acted up when the figure wasn't there. I checked all the wiring and power sources. Everything was solid. What creeped me out the most was how the snow and leaves stayed pristine. There was no evidence on the ground that anything had passed through. No broken branches, no footprints, no disturbed grass. It was as if the figure was moving through the space, but somehow not interacting with it, like a ghost or a trick of light. One evening, I took my rifle and headed out to the clearing, figuring I might get lucky and spot whatever it was. The air was crisp and still. The sky was clear, the northern lights faintly glowing over the horizon, but I didn't see any movement. I settled near the cameras, keeping low behind a fallen spruce. I waited for hours, scanning the shadows with my headlamp off, eyes adjusting to the darkness. The only sounds were the occasional crack of ice on the river and the soft rustle of wind through the trees. About midnight, something shifted in the clearing. At first, it was just a flicker, a sudden ripple of shadow near one of the cameras. Then the same smooth, elongated figure appeared, moving slowly across the snow without a sound. It didn't acknowledge me or the light from my campfire. It glided like it was part of the night itself, limbs stretching far longer than any humans could. My breath caught, but I didn't move. Then the air around me seemed to pulse. The hairs on my arms stood up. My radio, which had been silent, started crackling with static. The temperature dropped sharply, like someone opened a freezer door right next to me. The figure moved closer to the cameras, and just like before, the signal from each camera started to warp. I noticed the snow under the figure stayed undisturbed, almost like it was floating. I felt watched, not by the figure, but something else, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I kept my eyes on the shape until it slipped back into the tree line and vanished. The radio went silent. The temperature slowly climbed back to normal. When I got back to the cabin, I reviewed the footage again. The glitches were worse than ever. Frames tearing and colors bleeding into each other like paint running down a canvas. I told a few folks in town, but you know how it goes. Some nodded, some just smiled politely. No one else had seen anything like that, and most chalked it up to wildlife or camera malfunction. I kept watching the footage for weeks after. The figure never showed up anywhere else but that clearing. It moved too smoothly to be any animal I knew, and the lack of physical disturbance around it was the strangest part. Sometimes, late at night, I'd swear I heard that soft thumping rhythm, like footsteps without a sound, echoing through the cabin. I'd look outside and there'd be nothing but the vast empty Yukon wilderness, silent and waiting. I don't know what it was or what it wanted, but it was there, watching, moving just beyond the edge of what I could see or understand. And the more I looked, the less I felt like I knew my own backyard. My name's Eli Turner. I'm from a little village up near the Brooks Range. Nothing more than a few cabins huddled by the river where the snow sticks around most of the year and the daylight is just a whisper during winter. I don't get out much, but I know the folks around here, especially the old-timers who've been around since before I was born. They like to share stories over a fire when the wind's howling outside. Wake. And one of their favorites is about something they call the silent visitor. I never paid it much mind at first, just another piece of local color, like the stories about spirits or the moose that wander into town. But that winter, something happened that made me see those tales in a different light. It started in early December when the river froze solid enough for us to walk on. Old man Kata, the eldest in the village, told me about the visitor that comes every year when the nights are long and the cold gets sharp. He said this visitor never speaks, never makes a sound, but always leaves strange carvings on the ice, symbols nobody could make heads or tails of. One morning, I woke up early and headed down to the river, hoping to see these carvings for myself. The village was still wrapped in that thick quiet that only comes with deep winter. The only sound was the crunch of my boots on the snow-packed trail. When I got to the riverbank, I saw it. There were the carvings. They looked like a series of interlocking shapes, kind of like runes or some old script, but nothing I recognized. They were cut deep into the thick ice, the edges sharp and clean, as if made with a blade. The patterns ran maybe 20 feet across, and I could see frost creeping into the lines, making them glow faintly in the pale morning light. I crouched down and traced a finger near one of the symbols. The ice was cold as hell, of course, but what threw me was how the shapes seemed off, like they weren't quite stable. I don't know how to explain it exactly, but if you looked away for a second and then back, they'd seem to shift ever so slightly. I blinked a few times, but the shapes just weren't lining up the way they had a moment before. I stood back and stared longer, trying to convince myself I was just tired or my eyes were playing tricks. But that wasn't the end of it. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I grabbed my coat and flashlight and headed back to the river. The moon was low and casting weak light over the snow. The air was sharp, and the whole world felt frozen solid. When I reached the spot, the symbols were still there, but they had changed. Some of the lines were longer, others shorter. The pattern seemed rearranged, like a puzzle with pieces sliding around in the dark. I checked my phone for the time and noticed nearly 2 hours had passed since I first saw them that morning. I tried calling the village, no signal. The cold had knocked out the tower's line, or so I figured. I circled the carvings a few times, careful not to disturb the ice. The feeling I got standing there was strange. Not fear, exactly. More like being watched, but by something waiting quietly, keeping close. I stayed out a little longer, then walked back toward the village. That's when I caught sight of footprints in the snow leading off toward the tree line. They were fresh, maybe just hours old, but they weren't like anything I'd seen before. The prints were wide, with no clear toes or claw marks, just ovals spaced evenly apart. Curious and a little uneasy, I followed them cautiously. They disappeared into the shadow of the spruce and birch, where the snow was untouched beneath the canopy. The next day, I showed the carvings to Keda and a few others. They listened but said nothing new, just nodded slowly like they'd seen it all before. Keda said the visitor never comes closer than the river's edge, always silent, always watching. Over the next week, I kept checking the ice. The symbols kept shifting every time I looked. Sometimes they'd form patterns that looked almost like words, other times like maps or charts. The more I stared, the less I could make sense of them. They seemed to breathe, almost alive. One night, when the northern lights were flickering faintly overhead, I heard something moving near the tree line while I was out walking. It wasn't an animal, no growls or calls, just soft footsteps crunching on dry branches. I turned and shined my flashlight toward the sound, but there was nothing there. The light caught on something metallic just beyond the trees, a dull, curved shape half buried in snow. I went over and brushed the snow away, but I couldn't figure out what it was. It didn't look like anything from around here, at least not any tool or gear I recognized. It was smooth, almost polished, but worn and scratched like it had been there a long time. I stuffed it in my pack and headed back, heart pounding. When I got home, I tried cleaning it up more, but it stayed cold and strangely heavy, like it didn't belong. By then, the village started talking more about the silent visitor. Some people said they'd seen flickers of light moving across the river at night, tiny glows that vanished if you blinked. Others heard soft tapping noises on the roof or saw shadows that didn't match any trees. I don't know if it was connected to those carvings or the shape I found. Maybe it was just winter madness setting in with the long nights and endless cold. But the strangest part came a few days later. I woke up and grabbed my jacket, planning to check the ice again. When I got there, the carvings were gone. The river was smooth and perfect, like the cold had erased every trace. I looked around, but there was no sign the visitor had been back. The footprints in the snow were faded, trampled by wind and animals. I walked home slow, feeling like something I'd seen was slipping away with the thaw. I still keep that piece of metal in my cabin. It sits on the windowsill, catching the weak sunlight in the morning. It doesn't rust or change, but sometimes when the light hits it just right, it throws little shadows on the wall, shadows that don't look quite right. I don't know what I saw or what that visitor really is. Nobody does. But some winters, when the nights drag on and the river freezes hard, I swear I can still hear soft scraping sounds on the ice, like a silent hand carving out its stories. I was hiking alone near the southern edge of the Bitterroot Range, early October, before the snow came in heavy. The place I went isn't on a marked trail. It's one of those old Forest Service access roads that got decommissioned years ago, now mostly used by hunters and the occasional backwoods camper. I'd found it the year before while helping a friend scout elk routes. There was a path just faint enough to follow if you knew what you were looking for. My name's Nate Shepard. I'm 38, live in Missoula, and I like to get out in the woods a few times a year to clear my head. That weekend was supposed to be a short overnight solo. Hike in, set up camp, maybe catch some stars if the sky held clear. No cell service, no sounds except wind and birds. That kind of quiet always settles me down. The weather was cold but dry, sky overcast but thin enough that I could see the ridgelines against the clouds. I got started around 2 p.m., parked the old pullout by mile marker 87, and started up the slope. About a mile and a half in, I passed a sign I hadn't seen before. Metal, dull gray, bolted crooked into a pine. It just said, "Restricted zone, no entry beyond this point," in block letters. No agency logo, no contact number. That was odd. I'd been this way before and never seen a posted boundary. It didn't look new either. Rust had started eating into the edges, and the bottom right corner was bent like someone had tried to tear it off. I stood there for a second, thinking. I wasn't doing anything illegal. No fire, no hunting, just hiking. And from what I could tell, the sign was barely attached to anything. No fence, no tape, nothing. Just a single tree off a game trail. I figured it was left over from a fire closure or some old logging claim. I kept going. A couple more miles in, I set up camp near a small bluff that overlooked a dry creek bed. By then, the sun had dropped behind the mountains and the temperature started falling fast. I got a small fire going, made some tea, and sat on a log with my headlamp off, watching the trees sway in the breeze. Then I noticed a light. It was about tree height, maybe 30 or 40 feet up, deeper into the forest, maybe 100 yards out. At first I thought it was a drone. It had that kind of precise, hovering quality, but it moved strange. It wasn't steady. It would pulse, dim to nothing, then flare up again a few feet away, like it was blinking out and reappearing, not moving between points. The color was red, but not like a laser pointer or taillight. It was softer, more organic. A reddish glow that shifted slightly, like it was being seen through water. It made no sound. No whir, no clicking, nothing. I stood up slowly, not wanting to draw attention to myself, and turned off the fire with a few scoops of dirt. The light pulsed twice more, then vanished. I stayed still, staring into the dark, but it didn't come back. I didn't sleep much that night. In the morning, I packed up early and started back down the trail. No light, no sound, nothing out of place, but the woods felt hollow. That's the best way I can put it. Like the wind had stopped carrying, like the forest wasn't listening anymore. I know that sounds dumb, but that's how it felt. About half a mile from where I'd parked, just before the path starts widening out near the edge of the tree line, 2 men were standing across the trail. Both were wearing suits, not outdoors gear, not uniforms, actual black suits. No coats, no hats, no bags. Their shoes were clean, too clean for this trail. The shorter one had gray hair and a sunken face. The other was taller, looked younger, but had the same unreadable expression. They weren't talking to each other, just standing side by side like they'd been waiting there. I slowed down and gave a quick nod, thinking maybe they were from Fish and Game or some weird private land agency. But they didn't introduce themselves or ask what I was doing. The shorter one just looked at me and said, very calmly, "This part of the forest doesn't exist." I laughed a little, instinctively, thinking I'd misheard. "Excuse me?" He repeated it. Same tone. "This part of the forest doesn't exist." I stood there a few feet away from them, unsure if I was being threatened or tested. "Look," I said, "I didn't see any fence. I was just hiking. I'm heading back to my car now." Neither of them moved. The taller one finally spoke, just 3 words. "You weren't here." I didn't say anything after that. I walked around them without making eye contact and picked up my pace. They didn't follow. When I got to the road, my truck was exactly where I'd left it, but the back tailgate was unlatched. I never leave it unlatched. Nothing was missing, just shifted around. My cooler was upside down, and my sleeping bag was unrolled and hanging halfway out the back. I threw everything in, locked the doors, and drove the hour and a half back to Missoula without stopping. Later that night, I checked the GPS app I'd used to record my hike. The track stopped abruptly about halfway in. No elevation data, no timestamps past that point. Just a straight line ending in the middle of the woods. I opened the file again the next morning. The track was gone completely. I haven't gone back. Not to that trail. Not even close. I was working night patrol on Highway 24, out near the Book Cliffs in eastern Utah. Pretty dead stretch most nights. Long runs between towns, barely any exits, just open desert and red rock. It was early April, windy but clear, and I'd been parked at one of those gravel pull-offs around mile marker 219, just killing time and watching for speeders, which honestly was rare past midnight. It was just after 2 a.m. I remember that because I'd looked at the clock, thinking I might finally grab a sandwich from the cooler. That's when I saw it, something hovering up near the ridge to the north. Not flying like a plane or moving like a drone, just hanging there. It looked like a box, a perfect black cube, maybe the size of a small car. No lights, no reflection. It didn't wobble or rotate, just sat there maybe 40, 50 feet off the ground above the ridgeline. At first I thought it had to be some weird perspective thing, like maybe it was a tower or a boulder catching weird light. But there was no moon, and the stars behind it were gone. It blocked them completely. I got out of the cruiser and stood by the door. The wind was sharp, and the only sound was the occasional gust over the hood. I stood there staring at this thing, trying to make sense of it. My first instinct was to call it in, but I hesitated. What would I say? Floating cube, not doing anything? Then it moved, smoothly, sideways, not fast, maybe like 5 or 6 miles per hour, straight to the left, keeping the same altitude. Still, no lights, no sound, just this dark box sliding along the ridgeline. It covered about 100 yards and then stopped again, like it was observing something. I finally picked up the radio. I said I had an aerial object, unknown type, possibly a drone, hovering near mile marker 219. Dispatch asked if I wanted them to contact air support, but I told them to stand by. I wasn't sure it was worth escalating. It wasn't breaking any laws, technically, just existing. I got back in the car and kept eyes on it through the windshield. I watched it for maybe 5 more minutes. Then it started ascending, slowly straight up. It went higher and higher until I couldn't see it anymore. No blinking lights, no trail, just gone. That's when the headlights showed up behind me. I hadn't heard an engine, I hadn't seen the approach in my mirrors. 1 second the road was empty. The next, a black sedan was idling behind my cruiser, maybe 10 feet back. No tags, no department markings. Windows completely blacked out. I stepped out again and started walking toward them, hand resting on my sidearm, but not drawn. My flashlight was already on. I shined it toward the windshield, but it reflected clean off the glass. Couldn't see anything inside. 2 men got out. Identical black suits, white shirts, black ties. They looked off. Their posture was too straight, too synchronized. One was taller, maybe 6'2", the other shorter, stockier. They didn't look like agents. More like mannequins dressed as agents. Neither one spoke. The tall one walked up to me. No badge, no ID. Just held out a manila folder with a red stamp on the corner that said Natural Phenomena, all caps. The folder was too clean, like it had just come off a printer. He handed it to me without saying a word and stepped back. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet. No letterhead, no official seal. Just a list of numbered bullet points. 1. Object observed between 1 and 3 a.m. 2. Do not engage or pursue. 3. No further documentation required. 4. No photographs. 5. Do not discuss with media or outside agencies. There was a small box at the bottom labeled Initial Confirmed with a blank line next to it. I looked up and the stockier guy was holding out a pen. I didn't sign it. I asked them who they were with. Neither of them answered. The tall one just looked at me and said, "The object is not your concern." His voice was even. No emotion, but something about it made my stomach turn. Not the words themselves, how they were delivered. Like, English wasn't his first language, but he had memorized the sentence perfectly. I handed the folder back and told them I needed identification if they were going to give me directives. The tall one smiled barely, not like he was amused, more like he was mimicking what he thought a smile was supposed to look like. The shorter man looked past me toward the ridge and said, "You didn't see where it went." I said, "I didn't follow." He repeated it, same tone, You didn't see where it went. They got back in the car. No engine noise, no lights. The sedan rolled backward, made a perfect three-point turn, and drove off into the dark without headlights. Headlights. It didn't accelerate fast, just glided down the highway like it knew the road better than I did. I got back in my cruiser. Checked the dash cam. It was recording, but the playback showed nothing but black where the cube had been. No outline, no distortion, just clean sky. The sedan didn't show up on the camera at all. You could see my door open, and you could see me get out talking to someone off-screen, but there was no vehicle behind me. Nothing. I stayed parked there another hour, trying to decide whether to report the full story. In the end, I just logged it as an unidentified aerial object, no interaction, no pursuit. That was 6 weeks ago. I haven't seen the cube again. But twice since then, I've noticed the same sedan parked off the road near my shift change point. Same model, same dark glass. Never moving. Never there when I come back through. I didn't sign the form, but they act like I did. I rolled off State Route 89 onto the gravel lot of Pine Creek Station at 11:03 p.m. The sign's neon open buzzed and flickered through a haze of fog settling in off the nearby river. It was late October, and the temperature had dropped enough that I could see my breath when I stepped out of the car. I needed gas, my tank was on E, and I was tired of worrying whether I'd make it to the next stop 20 miles down the road. I cut the engine and opened the door. The only lights were the flickering neon and a single overhead lamp above the pump. I clicked the lock on my little hatchback, grabbed the nozzle, and started pumping. That's when I noticed the first sedan, parked maybe 20 feet away on the far side of the building. Black, tinted windows, immaculate paint, headlights off. Inside, in the driver's seat, was a man in a suit. Black jacket, crisp white shirt, narrow tie. His posture was rigid. He sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead. I called out, "Hey," softly, but he didn't move. I expected him to get out or at least glance at me. He didn't. I shook it off and looked toward the other side of the lot. The same model black sedan parked at the exact same distance on the opposite pump, engine running low and hollow, idling quietly. Another man sat in the driver's seat, same suit, same posture, arms resting straight on the wheel, face a shadow behind his dark sunglasses. I stared long enough to note that their headlights were off, but their taillights glowed faintly red, as if freshly turned off just a moment ago. The gas clicked off at $20. I snapped the nozzle back into place and locked up. I fished for my wallet and my purse, passed the clerk at 20, and got a receipt. I glanced back at the two cars. Both drivers hadn't even registered that I'd moved. The stillness felt deliberate. I headed for the door of the station, shivering in the cold air. Inside, the clerk, a young guy named Derek who always stayed late, was stocking chips. No bell on the door. He didn't look up until I was almost at the counter. I asked if anyone else had come in, and he said no. I told him about the cars outside. He shrugged and said folks sometimes park there overnight, though he hadn't seen those before. Maybe hunters, he said. I nodded, paid for a soda, and told him thanks. Back outside, I took a long swig of cola and scanned the lot. The sedans were exactly where I'd left them. I thought about snapping a photo, but my phone battery was nearly dead, and I didn't want to fumble with it. Instead, I climbed back into my car, locked the doors, and let the interior light click off. As I pulled out onto the cracked pavement, I felt both cars shift in my mirrors. The one on the left started up. Taillights brightened, engine crackled to life. The one on the right did the same. I eased forward slowly, keeping my eyes on both. They pulled out behind me, following exactly the path I'd taken, but holding back by maybe 30 feet. I watched in the rear view as the left-hand sedan navigated onto Route 89 northbound, and the right-hand sedan turned south onto the little road that led to the river crossing. I blinked, slowed to a crawl, tried to convince myself it was coincidence, timing and fog and two drivers leaving at once. But when I looked again, neither car was there. Empty road ahead, empty gravel lot behind. No skid marks, no headlights fading into the distance, just black pavement reflecting my taillights. I exhaled so hard I almost blew the fog off my rear window. I thumbed the defroster on, then gripped the wheel and drove north, keeping my speed under 30, scanning every curve for signs of those sedans. Nothing. For the next 15 miles, I didn't see a single other car. No trucks, no glimmer of headlights in the fog. I turned the radio dial. Static. An old country station sputtered in and out but played no songs I recognized. I rolled down the windows. Silence, except for the engine and the wind pulling at the edges of the fog. I passed a junction marked Gold Ridge Road and thought about stopping to check my mirrors again, but the thought of stepping out in that empty black mist made me keep going. I wanted home. I wanted my warm apartment. I wanted to look at daylight. At mile marker 103, the fog lifted. Streetlights appeared in the median, a cluster of homes evidenced by lit windows. I pulled into my driveway at exactly 12:07 a.m. No cars in sight, no footprints in the gravel. I leaned back, hands on the wheel, and tried to steady my breathing. In the morning, I told myself I dreamed it. But the next day at work, I found a receipt in my purse for Pine Creek Station, dated for 11:09 p.m., an extra 9 minutes past when I thought I'd paid. I asked a coworker if I sometimes loitered in my car and clocked extra minutes. He laughed and said no, I was punctual. He said receipts print in real time. That meant I was in the station at 11:09 p.m. But I remembered stepping out at 11:03, pumping gas, paying before 11:05. I opened the receipt, Pine Creek Station, pump 2. That was the one nearest the first sedan, the one with the engine off. Pump 2 was on the side I'd stopped. What was I doing in there at 11:09? Later that weekend, I drove back out, not on a dark night, but mid-afternoon, clear sky, warm sun, to see if the station still looked the same. The pumps were rusty, the neon sign gone. Someone had taken the old building too, leaving a skeleton shell of concrete and broken windows. I poked around the lot. No sign of 2 sedans ever parking there. No security camera, no barrier arms, just empty gravel and tufts of grass popping through cracks. I filled my tank at a chain station down the road, paid exactly $20, and kept the quiet hum of regular life going. But every time I drive past where Pine Creek Station used to be, I glance at the gravel and wonder who was sitting behind those dark windows that night, and where they went when I left. I pulled off the gravel road just before sunrise, engine ticking as it cooled. The morning fog hung low over my cornfield, thick enough that I couldn't see the far edge. I grabbed my thermos and flashlight, locked the cab, and headed out to check the new irrigation lines I'd laid last week. The air smelled like damp earth and green stalks. As I walked between the rows, I noticed something odd ahead. The corn was missing. At first, I thought I'd misremembered where the new lines ran, but when I got closer, the stalks ended abruptly against perfectly straight lines. I crouched and ran a hand over the cut stalks. No ragged edges, just smooth, even shears about waist high. The flattened area formed a hexagon, each side exactly as long as the next. I shone my flashlight over the ground. Every stalk leaned at the same angle, pressed into the soil like someone had ironed it flat. No footprints, no tire tracks, nothing to show how anyone got in or out. I stood up and circled the pattern. The fog muted all sound. Even the birds were quiet. I looked back toward the farmhouse, still too far to make out details, and sat down on a cut stalk to collect my thoughts. My boots pressed into damp soil. Every step into the flattened patch left a clear heel imprint, but outside those 6 sides, the ground was untouched. Not a single track across the perimeter. I walked back to the barn, wondering if a weather balloon or an ag drone gone wrong could explain it. My black lab Bess caught sight of me at the door and ran out, tail wagging. She sniffed at the flattened corn and looked up at me, whining once, then padded back toward the house. I didn't blame her for wanting to leave. By mid-morning, the fog lifted and the sun burned off the last of the chill. I refilled the water trough and tightened a loose bolt on the pump, still thinking about that hexagon. I'd plowed hundreds of acres in my life, and I'd never seen anything like it. I tried to call my neighbor Rick, but got his voicemail. I texted a photo from the edge of the field, the stalks bent low and gleaming in the sunlight, but my phone said sent without a timestamp. Odd, but maybe the tower was just slow out here. At noon, I climbed into my pickup and emptied 3 ice-cold sodas on ice for when I got back the shop. The truck's AC didn't work, so I drove with the windows down, dust settling in the cab. My shirt was damp with sweat when I reached the equipment shed. I grabbed a wrench and set off to check the planter's drive belt. I always felt safer around machinery than around stumps of snapped corn. That's when I saw them. Two men stepped out of the tree line along the north edge of the field, 12 feet apart, mirroring each other's stride. Both wore black suits, jackets buttoned, white shirts, narrow black ties. Neither carried a bag or hat. No sunglasses, but their eyes were hidden in shadow. They walked with that slow, measured pace you see in airport security guards, the exact same gait. Between them, they carried nothing but a glint of sunlight off polished shoes. I froze, wrench in hand. They didn't hurry or greet me. They just reached the corner of the flattened patch and stopped. The taller one looked down at the bent stalks, then at me, without expression. I set the wrench on a crate, wiped my hands on my jeans, and said, "Can I help you fellas?" The shorter one tilted his head slightly and asked, "Did anything change in the soil?" He sounded like he was reading off a card. Flat, practiced. I pointed at the hexagon. "I've been farming this land for 20 years. The soil's soil. It gets compacted sometimes, but this," I waved at the clean lines, "this isn't natural." The tall one agreed. "No tracks, no debris. A geometric flattening suggests external pressure evenly applied." He crouched, ran a gloved finger across the soil. "Did you apply herbicide?" I shook my head. "No, nothing like that. I'd have seen the signs on the monitor, and it'd kill the plants, not lay them over neatly." He stood and brushed off his pants. "What about subsoil irrigation? Any new pipes?" I realized my phone was ringing. It was Rick. I ignored it and said, "The new lines run south of the east field. This is north." They nodded as if it confirmed they'd already checked their notes. The shorter man asked, "Any seismic activity overnight? Vibrations?" I thought back to the fog, the morning calm. No sirens, no quakes, nothing on the news. If that pattern happened from below, I'd see cracked soil or upheaval. I paused and added, "Pipes wouldn't bend plants like that." They glanced at each other without speaking. Then the tall one said, "Stay off the area for 72 hours. Light soil sample kits are en route." He reached into his jacket and handed me a plain envelope, white, the kind you get from government offices, stamped with a code I didn't recognize. Inside was a single sheet, a list of test protocols and a date exactly 3 days ahead. No letterhead, no signature, just instructions to await technician arrival. I looked up. The men were watching my face. I asked, "Who are you?" He said, "An appropriate liaison." The other man stepped back into the trees without another word. The first followed, both disappearing into the maple and oak beyond the field, leaving only birdsong in their wake. I stood alone at the edge of that flattened corn, holding the envelope. The sun was high now, turning the stalks yellow around the perimeter. I turned the paper over, no backside printing. I stuck it in my back pocket, grabbed the wrench, and returned to the shed, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. That evening, I checked the envelope again. I found an official folder tucked inside my toolbox. Same plain white paper, same code stamped on the cover. Under the fluorescent shop light, the edges of the folder showed no adhesive, no staples. Someone must have put it there while I wasn't looking. I drove home on the lane road, dust cloud behind the truck, sweat cooling on my neck. Bess rode in the passenger seat, ears back. At the mailbox, I paused, staring at the envelope in my pocket. I tossed it inside and slammed the lid. No one stopped to watch. In my kitchen, I boiled a pot of water and poured over instant coffee. I flicked through channels, nothing but reruns and weather. The only thing on the local news was a road closure 90 miles away. Night fell. I stood in the back doorway, listening to crickets beneath the stars. The flattened pattern looked small from here, a pale scar in my mind. Tomorrow I'd mark the field and avoid that patch until the technicians came. Until then, the soil would keep its silence secret, and I'd keep checking for tracks that never appeared. I remember leaning my forehead against the cold glass of the back window around 2:15 a.m., trying to keep my eyes open. We were driving north on Highway 47, the stretch that cuts through the Willamette National Forest. Dad was behind the wheel, Mom was dozing in the passenger seat, and I was clutching my bag of pretzels on the bench seat in back. I'd asked to come along, I wanted to see the coast at sunrise. But halfway through Oregon, I was already half asleep. That's when I saw the lights. They weren't headlights. They hung among the trees on our right, zigzagging just beyond the tree line, matching our speed as we cruised at about 50. I sat up straight, blinking. The first two were small, yellow-white glints, shifting side to side in perfect rhythm with the road. Then two more, faint, reddish ones, dropped in behind. They paced us for maybe 3 or 4 miles, always at the edge of the forest, never more than 30 feet off the pavement. I nudged Mom. "Look," I whispered. She mumbled, "Huh?" and turned over. Dad didn't notice, I'm sure of it. He never takes his eyes off the road. I watched those lights drift past every utility pole, each time blinking just as we passed. At first, I thought it was camping lanterns, maybe people hiking along the service road, but there was no service road out there, nothing but trees. And the lights moved too smoothly for someone carrying gear. No bobbing like a flashlight, just a calm, side-to-side drift, easing forward as if they were locked to our wheels. I leaned forward and tapped on the divider behind the front seats. Mom woke up, squinting. "What is it?" "There," I said. "Did you see that? The lights in the trees." I pointed out the window. She yawned and said, "Probably just hunters. Odds are we're near some logging road. They've got spotlights for elk." I watched the lights shift again, exactly when we passed a curve in the road. They didn't cut through the trees to follow us. They just glided along the edge, like they were aware of the asphalt and stayed parallel to it. I wasn't convinced about hunters. By then, the cloud cover had broken enough that I could see a few stars, and there were no distant towers or glow from nearby roads. Just black forest and that string of lights drifting. I tried snapping photos with my phone, but the flash turned the screen white, scaring the lights away for a second. When the trees faded back to darkness, they were gone. I checked the camera roll. Only the flash images, nothing beyond the trees. I fumbled with the phone for a moment, trying to get a clean shot, but nothing appeared. The lights seemed to vanish whenever I aimed the camera. I tucked the phone away and sat back, wondering if I'd imagined it. But I'd felt that pull in my chest, a nervous little tug whenever the lights hovered by a big Douglas fir. Every time we passed a tree, they lingered beside it for a beat, then drifted to the next. Mom woke again, this time more alert. "What's up, kiddo?" I told her. "I saw lights back there. Someone's in the woods next to us." She frowned at the window, took a sip of coffee from the thermos she'd packed. "It's a state forest. People hunt and hike at night. They're probably on a trail." "I didn't see a trail," I said, "and they weren't walking." She shrugged and gave me a warning look, like I was being dramatic. Dad said nothing but flicked on the overhead map light, checked his speed. We drove on in silence. About 20 minutes later, the glow of a 24-hour gas station popped up ahead. Dad announced, "Time for fuel." He slowed off the highway onto a dim frontage road. The lights in the trees held their pace until we passed a gap in the forest. No more lights. They never blinked once more. I pressed my face to the glass, looking back down the dark woods. No glow, no lanterns, just black trunks and shadows. At the station, Dad filled the tank and popped the hood to check the oil. Mom went inside for snacks. I stayed in the back seat, door open, only half listening to the humming pumps. An hour ago, I had watched those lights keep pace beside us. Now there was nothing behind the forest line. As Dad shut the hood, I slid out. "They were there," I told him. "They stopped too, when we did." He glanced at me, confused. "Stopped what?" "Those lights. They were following us up the highway. Then when we pulled off, they just stopped." I pointed back toward the dark stand of trees. He shrugged. "No one's out there now, son. Just the usual forest." I didn't argue. Instead, I walked closer to the edge of the station lot, stood by the pumps, and stared at the tree line. The headlights from the station lights reached maybe 10 feet into the woods. After that, it was deep black. I waited. Nothing moved. No spotlights, no hunting lantern beams, only the wind chimes above the store door jingling softly in a non-existent breeze. Mom came out carrying chips and soda. "Everything okay?" I nodded. "Yeah." I stared past her at the dark trees. My stomach felt tight. "They're gone." She set the snacks on the roof of the truck. "Maybe they left." I shook my head. "They were following the car. They stopped when the car stopped." Dad didn't look over. He climbed in, slammed the door for the lock to click. I slid back in the middle. Mom settled beside me. We drove off with the gas station lights behind us. I watched the rearview mirror. The forest slid past empty and silent. That night, I replayed it in my head, lights pacing the car, silent and smooth, then evaporating the moment we stopped. No flash of headlights, no beam lifting into the sky, no last flicker. Just nothing. I tried to get some sleep in the motel, but my mind kept flicking back to the highway and those lights drifting beside us. I wondered if I'd really seen them or if they were a trick of my half-awake mind, conjured by the swish of tires and the dark line of trees. The next morning, the highway was bright and dry. No fog, no cloud cover. I pressed my face to the early glow against the woods, looking for any sign of light. Nothing. Dad rolled down the window and checked the shoulder. See? No tracks. No trail. I didn't tell him about the way the lights had moved, how they'd hovered at each tree's edge, or how they never made a sound, not even the hum of a generator or the buzz of LED lamps. I didn't say anything as we rolled into town, passing orchards and empty fields. But when I got home, I told my little sister I'd seen something odd on the trip. She listened with wide eyes, then asked if I thought ghosts could use camping lanterns. I just shrugged. Maybe they could. Maybe they couldn't. Some nights now, when I can't sleep, I think about turning off the porch light and stepping into the yard, looking back at the tree line across the street. I wonder if I'd see lights returning, drifting smooth and silent, same pace as my heartbeat. I woke up to a tap, tap, tap on the driver's side window. It was just after 2 in the morning, and I'd been dozing in my van, parked at a pullout off County Road 7. The wind had been rattling the side mirrors for a while, so at first I thought it was just a loose branch. Then the tapping came again, this time against the sliding door window, slower, deliberate. Tap, tap. I sat up in the driver's seat and blinked at the dark. My phone clock glowed 2:13. The cab was silent, except for my own breathing. No wind on the window now, just that steady tapping. I held my breath and peered through the side window, but I couldn't see anything. Just blackness and the faint outline of trees beyond the headlight's reach. Tap, tap. I clicked on the dome light, but the bulb sputtered and went out. I reached for my headlamp on the dash, flipped it on, and swept the beam across the exterior. No one there. The gravel beside the van was undisturbed. No footprints, no sign of a person. I exhaled, a little too loud, and shut off the light. That's when it happened. Every door lock engaged with a single clunk. Driver's door, passenger door, sliding door, rear doors, all locked as if by remote. My heart thumped. I hit the unlock button on the key fob. Nothing. I tried the manual lock on the driver's door. It wouldn't move. The other windows were sealed tight too. I sat frozen, ears straining. The tapping had stopped. Outside, the world was still. No wind, no insects, no rustling leaves. I flicked off the headlamp and pulled the shades covering the windshield. I needed darkness. I didn't want anything seeing in. My phone was dead, battery drained. I'd forgotten to plug it in after dinner. I pressed the power button anyway. Black screen. No service. No signal. I considered kicking out a window, but the glass was too thick, tinted, and locked. I sank back into the seat and tried to calm down. I keep a small knife in the glove box. I thought about using it to pry the lock, but something made me hesitate. I didn't want to risk making noise. Then, just as suddenly as the tapping began, I heard something else, a faint shh sound, like breath, against the outside of the windshield. Not a wind hiss, something closer, warmer. I pressed my forehead to the glass, heart pounding, and wiped away a small patch of fog. There was nothing there, no face, no handprints. Yet the glass felt colder where I'd touched it. The fog on the outside had to have come from somewhere. My breath couldn't reach it from inside the van. The windshield was covered in gray-white condensation, except for the small circle I'd wiped clean. My pulse raced. I stared at the cleared spot, expecting to see something materialize in the mist, letters scrawled, a shape pressed against the glass, anything. But it stayed empty. The fog quivered like a membrane. I pressed my ear against the cool glass. Nothing but distant frogs. Maybe a truck on the highway 2 miles away. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, listening to my breathing, waiting for more sounds. The night felt vast and empty, but I knew something had been pressing against the van. I thought about the road behind me, too far for anyone to travel in silence, especially on fresh gravel. At some point, the door locks clicked again, all four unlatching. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I waited another few seconds, eyes darting around, then unlocked the driver's door. The outside air was cold, damp, and smelled like pine and soil. My boots crunched on the frost-hardened gravel as I stepped out and circled the van. I looked for footprints, shadows, anything off. The woods beyond were dark, trees skeletal in the headlamp's glow. No one crouched behind the wheel well. No footprints led to the back of the van, only my own scattered tire impressions and my boots' prints from that circle around the van. I checked the windshield, now completely clear, as if the fog had evaporated. No smear where I'd wiped it, no droplets trickling down, just glass reflecting the low moon. I climbed back inside, heart still pounding, and closed the door. I leaned back in my seat, hands resting on the wheel, trying to slow my breathing. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I stared out at the road until the sky lightened a pale gray. By dawn, everything looked normal. I unlocked the doors one by one, slid open the side door, and stepped onto the frost-glazed pullout for the day. No claw marks, no message scrawled in fog, no sign that anything had touched the van. I drove home slowly, windshield wipers clearing fresh drizzle, mind replaying the tapping and that breathy shh across the glass. Ever since, I park my van only in front of my house, under the streetlight. Whenever I leave for a trip, I bring my phone charger everywhere. I haven't camped in it again at night. We were up at Broken Bow Lake in southeastern Oklahoma. Early June, not too hot yet, and the nights were still cool enough for a hoodie. There were four of us, me, Evan, George, and Tully. We do this trip every year, same spot, right along a quiet inlet on the North Shore. Evan brings his dad's aluminum boat. We camp near the water, fish during the day, drink and shoot the breeze at night. Nothing fancy. No cell service out there, which is the point. This happened on our second night. We'd had a long day on the lake. Jorge caught a decent catfish, Tully mostly just drank beer, and I spent half the time untangling my line. Pretty normal. We grilled dinner, told the same old stories, and passed around Evan's bottle of Old Forester once the sun went down. By 10, the fire was dying low, and we were just kind of staring at the lake. The moon was bright, maybe 3/4 full, and it was reflecting off the water clear as glass. No clouds, barely any breeze. You could hear frogs and the occasional splash of something out in the deeper water. Peaceful. Then the moon flickered. It was just for a split second, like a light bulb hiccuping. One blink, and it was back. Not behind clouds, there weren't any. The reflection on the water blinked too, perfectly synced, like someone had flipped a switch and flipped it back. And the sound cut out with it. Just gone. Then everything resumed like nothing happened. We all went quiet. I looked around to see if anyone else had noticed. Evan was frozen mid-sip from his bottle, and Jorge had his head tilted like he was listening for something. Tully just said, "Did you guys see that?" None of us answered at first. I remember my ears ringing a little, the kind of pressure you get when a plane's descending. Evan said, "The hell was that?" and set the bottle down. Then we heard Jorge say, "My watch reset." He held up his wrist. Digital Casio, nothing fancy. It read 1, like it had just powered on. Then Evan checked his. Same thing. Tully had a cheap analog one and said the second hand was ticking like normal but stuck at 12. I pulled my phone out of my backpack. It was off, not just asleep, fully powered down. When I held the button, the boot screen flashed for a second, then went dark again. We didn't talk for a while, just sat there staring at the moon. It looked normal again, steady, bright, too bright, honestly. Whiter than usual. Tully stood up and said he needed to piss, wandered off toward the trees. The rest of us stayed near the fire, which was mostly coals by then. I remember not wanting to look away from the lake. Something about it felt wrong, like it wasn't quite reflecting the way it had earlier. The ripple patterns were too slow, almost fake. A minute later, Tully called out, not shouting, not panicked, just loud enough to get our attention. "Hey, y'all hearing this?" he said. Evan stood up, then Jorge. I got up last. We walked toward the trees, but Tully met us halfway. He looked weird, like he'd just woken up from a nap, pale, kind of out of breath. "What'd you hear?" Evan asked. Tully said, "I don't know, not voices, just sound, but not from the woods, from up." We all looked up, and the moon was still there, nothing else, no planes, no blinking lights, but I could hear it too now, faint, way up high. A low tone, like when a TV's on mute. Just enough to notice if you were paying attention. It didn't come from a direction. It was just there, like the air was humming. We stood like that for a while, all four of us. Not talking, not moving. Listening to this pressure that didn't seem to get louder or fade away, didn't even feel threatening. It just was. Jorge was the first one to move. He walked down to the lake and shined his flashlight across it. I followed him, and Evan came too. Tully stayed back, leaning on a tree like he was dizzy. When the beam swept across the water, I noticed something that stopped me cold. There were no insects, no moths fluttering into the light, no mosquitoes, not even a single dragonfly. That whole area is usually crawling with bugs, especially near the shore. But it was just the beam on water, no movement. Then Evan dropped the flashlight. He didn't mean to. His hand just opened. The light hit the dirt and pointed straight up. I saw his face, mouth open, staring at the sky. We all looked. The moon was still there, but something was passing in front of it. Not a shape, exactly. More like a shadow that bent the light wrong. You couldn't see the edges of it. You just knew something was between you and the moon because the sky went dark in one spot, darker than the rest, and the stars around it vanished. Not all at once, one by one. It moved slowly, not drifting like a cloud, more like gliding. Clean. Silent. Whatever it was, it didn't make wind. The trees didn't sway. The lake didn't ripple. It just passed overhead, blotting out stars, and that weird hum seemed to swell a little. Not louder, just thicker. Harder to ignore. We backed up toward camp without saying anything. Jorge picked up the flashlight and turned it off. Didn't want to attract attention, I guess. We sat around the fire pit again, but no one added wood. Just sat in the dark, listening to nothing. Eventually the hum faded. Not all at once. Just thinned out over time like a headache easing up. I checked my phone again. This time it turned on, but the clock was wrong. It said 12:01 a.m., even though by then the moon had moved higher and it had to be at least 3:30. No signal, no GPS lock. Just a blinking time I knew wasn't right. Tully said he wanted to leave. Evan talked him out of it, said there was no point hiking out in the dark, but I could tell he didn't want to stay either. No one did. We didn't sleep, just sat around until sunrise, packed up and left without saying much. Jorge didn't even bother rolling his tent, just stuffed it in his pack and hauled it out crumpled. At the parking lot, we tried syncing our watches. Mine was still dead, but Jorge's had started running again from and Tully's was back to normal time, like nothing happened. Evans wouldn't respond at all. We all went back to our lives after that. No one brought it up again except Tully, once, a couple weeks later. He said he'd been having these dreams about the moon. Not nightmares, just dreams where it was bigger than it should be. Too close. I haven't been back to Broken Bow since. I was working nights at an equipment yard outside of Harlan, Kentucky. Nothing fancy. Just a gravel lot with some backhoes, dozers, and trailers. The kind of place where you sit in a prefab shack with a space heater and try not to fall asleep before 6 a.m. This was in December of last year. Cold enough to freeze the door shut if you didn't close it right. I worked 5 nights a week, alone. The other guy, Nick, covered weekends. The yard backed up to a wooded hill, and beyond that, just ridges and hollows. No streetlights out there. Closest house was a quarter mile down the road behind a chain of rusted cattle fences. That night, around 2:30 a.m., I was standing outside the shack, smoking. The heater inside was busted, so I'd been stepping out to warm up in the truck with the defroster on. The lot was dead quiet. You get used to how sound travels out there. Coyotes, the hum from the transformer on the pole, an occasional truck on the highway a few miles off. I remember I just lit a cigarette when I saw the light. It came down behind the ridge, slow but not drifting, more like it had a destination. At first, I thought it was a flare. Bright, white-yellow with this smooth glide, but it didn't arc like a flare. It didn't blink like a plane either. It was silent. No hum, no chop, no boom when it landed. Just a bright light descending behind the hill and then nothing. I stood there for a while. I hadn't blinked. It was maybe 5-6 seconds tops, but I was sure it landed. just on the other side of the rise near the tree line. I kept waiting to hear something. An engine, tires on dirt, even a branch snap. Nothing. The shack had an old pair of binoculars. I grabbed them and climbed up the loader parked near the fence for a better angle. I could just barely see the top of the ridge. No glow, no smoke, just stars overhead, the same as before. I called the sheriff's office, mostly because I didn't want to be the guy who saw something and didn't report it. Figured maybe it was a drone crash or something from the mine survey crews. They said they'd send someone out, so I stayed on the loader and waited. Deputy Reeves showed up about 20 minutes later. I knew him from high school. Good guy, kind of stiff. He asked me the usual direction, size, shape, noise level. I didn't have much to give, just a light going down slow, then nothing. He looked toward the hill and said, "Mind if we check it out?" I told him I wasn't going up there, not my property, and I didn't carry. So he called in another unit and waited with me until it showed up. The second guy was older, gray beard, didn't say much. They crossed the fence with flashlights and disappeared up the hill. I sat in the truck with the windows up, heat blasting. About 15 minutes later, Reeves radioed back in, said there was something they needed to take photos of. I got out and yelled if everything was okay. He just said, "Stay where you are." They were up there another half hour. When they came back down, both looked off. Not panicked, not angry, just real quiet. Reeves walked me back to the shack and asked if I'd touched anything, gone up there earlier in the shift, heard anyone else. I told him no, and he nodded like he already knew that. "What'd you find?" I asked. He just said, "We'll file a report. You should stay in the shack the rest of the night." They left right after. No tape, no sirens, just got in their cruisers and drove off. Next morning, a county truck came by with two guys who said they were from Wildlife and Game. Unmarked clothes. They asked if I'd seen anything strange. Dead animals, weird smells. I told them no, just the light. They didn't react. One asked if we stored fuel up near the tree line. I said no, just the gravel lot. They thanked me and drove up the same path Reeves had taken. Later that day, Nick texted me to ask what happened out there. I asked what he'd heard, and he said Reeves mentioned burned ground, no tracks. That's all. So the next night, I parked closer to the hill, right near the loader. I brought a flashlight, binoculars, even a thermos of coffee in case I wanted to hike up. But I didn't go right away. I waited until around 3 a.m. when everything was dead quiet again. Then I climbed the hill. It wasn't steep, but the brush was thick. I followed the path Reeves had taken, flattened grass, footprints in the frost. After maybe 10 minutes, I came over the ridge. That whole area was dead. Like, literally. No color in the brush. Just blackened grass, dry and brittle like it'd been torched. The trees were intact, but the bark looked bleached, and the soil had this cracked, baked look, like it'd been under heat. No leaves, no bugs, no sounds. Just a weird, still patch about 40 feet wide. The shape wasn't natural. It was a clean oval. Too clean. I walked into it. The air smelled flat. No char, no ash, just dry. And the ground had this weird give, soft, like it was cooked loose underneath, but not muddy. I crouched and picked up a handful of dirt. It crumbled like dry cake. No worms, no pebbles, just dark, almost gray-brown powder. I stood there for a while, looking at the trees, thinking maybe it was a lightning strike. But there was no point of impact, just uniform deadness. When I left the patch and stepped back into normal ground, I could hear the wind again. Not strong, just a breeze. But it hadn't touched the circle. Inside, it was still. Back at the shack, I wrote it all down. Even took a photo from the ridge with my phone, though it didn't show much, just dark trees and a faint outline of the oval. 2 days later, we got a new heater installed in the shack. The manager came by and said to avoid going past the fence line, said there was some contamination from old septic lines. Total bullshit. There'd never been septic up there. That patch is still there. I check it sometimes. Nothing grows. No animals walk into it. It's just dead, like it was erased. We were about 5 miles in, up near Cherokee National Forest, eastern Tennessee. Mid-October, sunny and cold. Leaves were just past peak, and the trail was scattered with reds and yellows that stuck to your boots when they got wet. It was me, Josh, and Alex, guys I'd hiked with plenty of times before. We weren't doing anything extreme, just a 2-night loop, enough to get away from work and phones and noise. The plan was simple: camp at Buckhorn the first night, cross over Ridge Gap the second, then come back down by the Fire Road. Weather had held steady all week, no rain in the forecast, and we made good time the first day. I remember we reached the old fire tower around 4, just before sunset, and climbed up to watch the light change. That part was normal. It was the second day when things got weird. We'd left camp around 9 a.m., aiming to make it over the ridge by early afternoon. The climb up was slow but steady. Josh was fiddling with his GPS the whole time, trying to track our pace, and Alex kept checking a paper map he'd laminated back home. I trusted them both. They were detail guys, always triple-checking bearings and coordinates. At one point, we hit a fork that wasn't on the map. Not unusual. Trails shift, signs fall, but both routes looked well-worn, and there were no blazes. Josh wanted to backtrack and find a clearer junction. Alex thought the left path looked more promising, judging by slope and direction. I pulled out my compass to get a better sense of our heading. That was the first strange moment. The needle spun, not wildly, not fast, just this slow, steady turn, like it couldn't decide on north. I tapped the face, thinking maybe it had gotten bumped in my pack. It kept turning. I held it still in my palm, still spinning. No stutter, no wobble, just a slow rotation that didn't stop. I called the others over. Josh took out his compass. Same thing. Spinning. Alex's did it too, but slower. His was older, a metal-based Silva he'd had since high school. We all just stood there for a minute, holding our gear out like idiots. It was completely quiet. No wind, no rustling. I remember noticing that, how still it was. Usually you hear birds or squirrels in the brush, something, but this was dead silent. Josh started pacing in a circle, holding his compass out like a dowsing rod. It spun the same way no matter where he went. We checked our phones, no signal, which wasn't surprising, but even the GPS app on Josh's phone couldn't find a fix. It just showed a blinking dot drifting around like we were floating in the ocean. We kept moving. No one said it directly, but I think we were trying to walk out of whatever this was. Maybe some mineral pocket under the ground was messing with magnetics. I've heard of stuff like that. But it wasn't just the compasses. After a few minutes, I started feeling pressure in my ears, like descending in an airplane, but slower, thicker. I tried to pop them, but it didn't help. I asked the others if they felt it. Josh said yeah, like being underwater. Alex nodded, but didn't say much after that. He looked pale. The trees started thinning as we walked, but not in the usual way. It wasn't that the forest opened up. It was more like the space between things had stretched. The distance between trees felt wrong, like a picture where someone widened the middle just enough to mess with your eyes. I stepped off the trail to pee and noticed the ground was dry as powder, even though we'd walked through dew that morning. I squatted down and picked up a handful. It crumbled like dust. No smell, no dampness, just dry, brittle earth. We passed through the strange patch in maybe 20 minutes. On the far side, the compasses stopped spinning. They didn't snap back to north. They just kind of slowed, then settled. The air felt normal again. Sound came back. Birds, wind, the usual forest hum. We didn't say much after that. Everyone seemed off. Josh checked his GPS again. It worked now, but it said we were about a quarter-mile south of where we should have been. Not a huge difference, but weird considering we'd walked a straight line, and the terrain hadn't changed that much. We made camp early that night, just before sunset. Nobody wanted to hike in the dark. We sat around the fire, cooked ramen, didn't talk much. I brought up the spinning compasses again, but Josh waved it off. Probably some freak magnetic pocket, he said. Alex didn't answer. He just stared into the fire and drank his instant coffee. I woke up in the middle of the night needing to pee, crawled out of my bag and stepped away from the tent. The moon was out, but the light was thin. I went maybe 20 feet off to the side of our site and noticed something odd with the trees. They weren't swaying in the wind, they were vibrating, gently, like the motion you see when heat rises off asphalt, except it was the actual trunks, just a slight shimmer. I stared at them for a while, not sure if I was fully awake. Then I heard this high-pitched whine. Distant, not painful, but constant. I turned around and looked toward camp. Josh's tent was zipped up. Alex's wasn't. The flap was open. I whispered his name, no response. Walked over and looked inside. He was there, eyes open, just lying still. I asked if he was okay. He blinked once, then slowly pulled the sleeping bag up to his chin. Next morning, he acted normal. Made coffee, packed up, didn't say anything about the night before. I wanted to ask him if he'd heard the sound or seen the trees, but something told me not to. Josh didn't mention anything either, so maybe it was just me. We finished the loop that day. Weather held, trail was clear. When we got back to the car, I checked my compass again. It pointed north like nothing had ever been wrong. On the drive home, I asked Josh if he'd saved the GPS track. He said yeah, but when he pulled it up later, the section from late morning that second day was just missing. Not a bad signal, just blank. Like it hadn't recorded at all. I kept the compass. Still works. But every now and then, when I take it out of the drawer, the needle starts that slow spin again, just for a few seconds, and then it stops. I dropped into the mouth of Black Canyon just before sunset, leaned into the turn, and felt the bike settle under me. I'm Marcus Rise, ride a BMW GS, run a small metal fab shop back in Grand Junction. I'd taken the day off to clear my head, roll through the switchbacks, and camp somewhere off the trail. No cell signal. No cell signal after about 10 miles in, which is exactly why I was there. I hit the gravel pull-off at Cottonwood Camp around 7:30 p.m., the sun low enough to turn the sandstone walls dusty orange. I parked, killed the engine, and let the canyon settle around me. Normally I'd hear crickets or maybe a distant crow, but there was nothing. Just a heavy quiet that felt almost solid in the air. I took off my helmet, wiped sweat off my forehead. Even though it was late August, the heat was sticking in my sinuses. I looked up at the rim, rugged, pine-dusted, fading to deep red as the light died. I set my helmet on the seat, leaned into my bike, and waited. After a few minutes, the canyon grew darker. Really dark, faster than I expected. The temperature dropped too, like someone had opened a freezer door above me. My breath fogged in front of my face. I took another ragged breath and shrugged. Cool night air, right? Then I felt it. A low vibration pulsing under my feet through the kickstand up into the seat of my pants. It was steady, almost like a distant motor idling, but there was no sound. I stood and looked around. No trucks on the service road, no helicopter or small plane in the sky. I glanced up. The first stars were out, tiny pinpricks in an inky sky. But somewhere above me, a shadow passed. It moved across the canyon mouth in a smooth arc, faster than a bird and slower than a plane. It blotted out the stars in a band maybe 50 yards wide. I squinted, but there was no shape, no wings, no fuselage. Just a moving darkness, a giant absence of light, sliding from left to right in perfect silence. Even the birds stayed still. I didn't hear a wing beat. My heart kicked up, but I stayed planted next to the bike, eyes on that dark patch. It moved at the same steady speed as the vibration, slow even. 10 seconds, 15? I couldn't say. When it cleared the canyon mouth, the stars blinked back in and the temperature eased a few degrees. I breathed deep and pushed my hair back. My radio crackled on my belt, normally dead on this road, and hissed static, then silence. No frequency. I tried the ignition kill switch. It clicked, but still no engine. The bike was cold, like I'd left it sitting for hours, even though I'd killed it only minutes before. I took out my phone, no bars of course, and flipped on the flashlight app. The beam cut a thin line across the spit of gravel. No footprints, no tire marks besides mine. The red walls retracted into the dark, the canyon going back to normal, as if nothing had happened. I sat back on the bike and tapped the starter. The engine roared instantly, surprising me. I kicked the stand up and rolled forward. My glove brushed the throttle, easy and familiar, but still I felt the after vibration in my chest, like I just stood on a subway platform and a train had thundered by, minus the noise. I crested the first bend, and the canyon opened to a plateau of scrub pines and boulders. The road was empty. Every reflective sign, every boulder, every hairpin curve looked exactly as I'd left it. No fresh gravel, no shifts or slips. The darkness remained solid around me, and the stars were static overhead. The ride back was slow. I kept twisting the throttle, trying to chase that vibration. Sometimes I'd swear I felt it flicker under me, but the canyon's curves created their own echo, their own dance of light and dark. Maybe it was just adrenaline. By the time I reached pavement near the Gunnison River, it was fully dark, and the world felt normal again. Crickets, distant headlights, the drone of tires on asphalt. I pulled into the first gas station, turned off the engine, and walked around the bike. It was spotless. Not a speck of gravel where I hadn't been, but it smelled faintly of burnt ozone, like something electrical had cooked itself just under the surface. I filled the tank, paid inside, and asked the attendant if anyone had seen strange lights down canyon after dark. He nodded slowly, said people talk about flickers around the old mining roads, but nobody knew for sure. Said he'd heard rumors of glowing orbs or sudden gusts of wind up where the walls pinched together. I frowned, paid, and left. I rode home under a full moon, clocking every mile. On my street, I flipped off the visor, parked in the driveway, and killed the engine. The bike sat silent, exactly where I left it, but in my chest, the echo of that vibration was still beating. I headed inside without locking the door, booted out of my riding gear into silence. I slept fitfully. In the middle of the night, I woke to the sound of my own heartbeat and a distant hum, so faint I thought it was in my head. But when I sat up, the room was cool and the window was closed. I stared at the ceiling, then turned on the lamp. The shadows in the room looked oddly solid, like they were standing just beyond the bulb's rim. I flicked off the light and lay back, counting breath until I could drift off. Morning came too soon. I made coffee, sat on the porch, and looked toward the canyon. The sun was bright, the walls striped red and tan, glowing golden. The air was still, full of birdsong and wind in the pines. I poured the last of the coffee onto the ground, my habit, and stood there until it soaked in. I thought about going back, hiking into that gravel pull-off, checking for footprints or scorch marks or anything. But part of me didn't want to see. I climbed back inside, locked the door, and got ready for work. The vibration never came back under me, but sometimes when the wind hits the canyon in the right way, I catch a low, steady pulse in my chest, as if that silent shadow is riding along just beyond my sight. I was out in Joshua Tree for a couple days, just me and my camera. I'm a photographer, mostly landscapes and street scenes, but I've been meaning to do something different. Something that felt a little more off the grid. Desert murals caught my eye, especially the ones painted on those old concrete walls near the trails. They're weird, colorful, a little creepy sometimes. Perfect for a new project, or so I thought. I got there late afternoon, the sun still high but starting to dip. The air was dry and hot, but there was a cool breeze that stirred the dust around my boots. I set up near one of the murals, a big piece with strange shapes, human figures twisted into impossible angles, faces half hidden behind strange patterns. I figured I'd get some good shots with the fading sunlight, play with shadows. I started taking pictures, moving around to get different angles. Nothing felt unusual at first, but as the sun dropped lower, I noticed something that didn't make sense. There were shadows on the wall that didn't match anything casting them. I mean, you'd expect shadows to line up with trees or me moving around, but these shadows shifted and changed shape independently. Sometimes they'd stretch in one direction while the sun was clearly setting the opposite way. Sometimes a shadow would vanish entirely, even though the object it belonged to was right there. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, or maybe the texture of the wall messing with perspective. But I watched for nearly an hour, and the shadows kept moving on their own, bending and twisting like they had a life of their own. That's when I noticed him. I didn't see him at first because he was wearing a black suit. Nothing too fancy, but crisp and clean compared to the dusty desert around us. He was standing just off to the side, near the edge of the mural, watching me without saying a word. I froze for a second, then lowered my camera slowly. He stepped forward, calm and deliberate. I couldn't tell if he was in his 30s or 40s, but he had this weird, almost blank expression that didn't change. He looked down at my camera strap, the leather one with a few pins I'd attached, some from old shows, some just souvenirs, and ran his fingers over it without asking. Some frames aren't for the public eye, he said quietly, not quite a warning, not quite a threat. Then he turned and walked straight into the mural. I blinked, and I swear he just vanished into the painted figures on the wall, like stepping through a door that wasn't there. I stood there, camera hanging from my neck, trying to make sense of it. I thought maybe it was a trick of the light again, or some shadow play from the paint, but no way anyone has disappeared like that. I called out to him, but there was no answer, just the wind picking up dust. I checked behind the mural, around the rocks, anywhere I could think of, but there was no sign of him. That night, back at the small motel in town, I went through my photos. The shadows in the images looked normal, but when I zoomed in on some frames, I caught little glitches, parts of the shadow that looked like ripples or faint, flickering edges. I thought maybe my camera was messing up. I kept hearing this weird tapping noise from the motel window, but every time I looked, nothing was there. My phone had a few texts from unknown numbers, but they were just random strings of letters. I deleted them. The next day, I went back to the mural. The sun was hotter, the desert less forgiving. The black-suited man wasn't there, but I felt watched again. The shadows on the mural were still doing that weird thing, moving separately from the objects. That's when I saw footprints, 2 sets, perfectly pressed into the dirt. They led up to the mural, stopped, and then disappeared right at the wall, like whoever had walked them stepped into thin air. I followed the tracks back toward the highway, but nothing unusual was waiting there. Later that evening, as I packed up my gear, a car pulled up. Black, tinted windows, no plates. 2 men stepped out, also wearing suits, but theirs were more like business suits. No tie, white shirts, polished shoes. One of them walked up to me without a word, examined my camera strap like the first guy had, then looked me straight in the eye. "Be careful with what you capture," he said softly. "Not everything should be recorded." The other man scanned the mural silently, then they both got back in the car and left, tires kicking up dust. I felt like I'd crossed some invisible line. The desert suddenly seemed smaller, less open, like the murals weren't just paint on concrete, but gateways to something I couldn't understand. I drove home that night with the radio off, the road stretching empty in front of me. I've gone back to my usual work since then, but sometimes I find myself staring at shadows, wondering if they're really just shadows or if something else is moving inside them. I never shared those photos publicly. I don't know what's really out there behind the paint and the light, but I'm not sure I want to find out. I was out by Lake Pendorale in northern Idaho, just past dusk on a chilly spring evening. I hadn't planned to be there long, just wanted to unwind after work and maybe get some shots of the stars or something. The weather was clear, but crisp, the kind of cold that makes your breath visible if you stop moving. I parked on the gravel road that leads down to a small public fishing spot. It's a quiet place, not a ton of people come around that late, especially on a weekday. I grabbed my phone and my camera, figuring I'd try to catch some long exposure shots of the water and sky. The lake's surface was mostly still, reflecting the stars perfectly. About an hour in, I noticed some faint lights flickering just above the tree line on the far side of the lake. They weren't like plane lights, too scattered and irregular to be aircraft. At first, I thought it might be a campfire, but the colors kept shifting. Red, green, pale blue, almost like those LED party lights, but without any pattern. I started recording video on my phone, zooming in to get a better look. The lights moved slowly like they were floating just above the trees, but the way they moved didn't make sense. Not quite like anything natural or man-made I'd seen before. They blinked on and off at times, then faded to almost nothing, only to reappear a little further over. I was thinking maybe it was a drone or some kind of light show from a private boat, but no sound carried over the water, and the pattern felt too deliberate. I kept filming for about 10 minutes before the lights vanished completely, slipping behind a thick cluster of firs. I sat back on a rock and scrolled through the video to check it. Everything looked grainy, but the lights were definitely there. Uneven, shifting colors, moving strangely. I thought about sending it to a few friends who are into this kind of stuff, but the signal was spotty out there, and my phone kept freezing on me when I tried to open the video again. That's when things started getting weird. At first, it was little things. The screen would glitch, flickering and distorting colors, apps crashing out of nowhere. I rebooted the phone twice, but it didn't help. Then the GPS stopped working. I was still connected to cellular data, but the maps wouldn't locate me. I figured I might have caught a bad spot or a glitch, so I packed up and started heading back to my truck. The forest was quiet, maybe too quiet. Usually I'd hear some night birds or distant cars on the highway, but there was nothing but the crunch of my boots on pine needles. When I got back to the parking lot, two men were standing near my truck, both dressed in black suits, no ties, plain black shoes, and wearing dark sunglasses even though the sun had set. One was taller, with thinning hair combed straight back, and the other had a square jaw and a kind of impassive expression. They didn't say hi or anything, they just looked at me. "Are you the one who took the videos near the lake?" the taller man asked, voice calm but firm. I blinked, surprised. "Yeah, that was me. How do you know?" He gave a small nod. "We're here about the device you used." I looked at my phone, now acting strange again. It's been glitching since I left the water. The second man stepped forward. "There's a technical issue. We need to take it and make some checks." I hesitated. "Why? What kind of issue?" "Something on the device could cause problems if left unchecked," the first man said. "For everyone's safety, it's best if we have it." I glanced around, my stomach tightening. "I don't think I'm comfortable handing it over." The tall man's gaze didn't waver. "We're not asking, just give us the phone." I felt my heart speed up, but tried to keep steady. "Look, I don't know who you are, but I'm not giving you my phone. You can see the video. You can verify it yourself." He shook his head slowly. "That won't be necessary. We'll send it back once it's fixed. You won't notice anything afterward." "Why should I trust you?" I said, taking a step back. The man with the square jaw suddenly pulled out a small black case from his coat pocket and opened it, revealing a few plain electronic gadgets I didn't recognize. "It's a simple procedure." I looked at them both and realized how out of place they were. Two strangers showing up out of nowhere, dressed like that, demanding my phone after I recorded something odd. Nothing felt right. "I'm sorry," I said, moving toward my truck. "I have to get going." The taller man's voice dropped a bit. "You don't understand. Sometimes things like this don't end well if mishandled." I ignored the warning and got in my truck. As I started the engine, I glanced back to see them standing there, motionless, staring at me. On the drive home, my phone's screen flickered occasionally, then went completely black. I tried turning it on multiple times, but nothing happened. When I got inside later that night, I plugged it in, hoping for a charge, but the phone wouldn't respond. I thought maybe it was just dead, but weirdly, other electronics around the house, my laptop, the Wi-Fi router, started acting up too. Lights dimmed briefly, the router dropped signal once or twice. Nothing major, but odd enough to notice. The next day, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it, but something made me pick up. "Mr. Harper?" a low, clipped voice said. "We're calling regarding your device." I sat down, unsure if I should hang up. "Who is this?" "You'll be contacted soon. Please cooperate." Then the line went dead. I tried calling back, but got nothing. After that, the glitches stopped. My phone finally powered on, but all the video files I recorded that night were gone. Even the ones I had saved from before the strange lights, like someone had wiped them clean. I never heard from the men in black again. The whole thing still bugs me. Why those lights, why the phone acting up, and why they were so interested in a simple video from a quiet lake. It's one of those things that feels half real, half like a bad dream you can't shake. But I know what I saw. I don't even know where to start with this. I was out in the backyard one night, just taking pictures of the stars like I usually do. I'm not some big astronomer or anything, just a hobbyist with a decent camera and a cheap tripod. My name's Clara. I live in a small town in northern Vermont, and this was about a year ago, late September. The air was cool, but still had that hint of summer hanging around. I had set up near the edge of my property where the trees thin out and the sky opens wide. It was just past 10 p.m., no moon, really clear night, perfect for star photos. I'd been snapping shots for maybe an hour, focusing on the usual stuff, the Big Dipper, Cassiopeia, that kind of thing. At some point, I noticed this one star up in the east that wasn't like the others. It was blinking, but not like a plane or a satellite. The blink was slow and rhythmic, almost like a signal, on, off, pause, on, off, pause. It caught my attention because none of the other stars were blinking at all, and This wasn't the kind of flicker caused by atmospheric distortion or clouds. I watched it for a while, trying to figure out if it was just some weird optical illusion or maybe a drone with a light, but it stayed perfectly still, and the blinking kept the same rhythm for at least 15 minutes. Then, slowly, it started to descend. It didn't just drop suddenly or streak across the sky like a meteor. It moved downward really slowly, like it was drifting or lowering itself behind the trees. That part got me weirded out. Usually stars don't move like that, right? I kept my camera pointed at it and managed to get some shots. The blinking light got bigger as it came closer to the treetops and then disappeared behind them. I waited another half hour just to see if it would come back, but it didn't. I told my best friend about it the next day, Maggie, and she teased me, said maybe I'd been looking at a blinking airplane light or a satellite. But I knew what I saw. Over the next week, I kept looking up every night around the same time, hoping to see it again. It never showed up. Then one afternoon, about 6 days after that night, I was at the town library, sitting in the little reading nook with a stack of astronomy books. The library's quiet, small, a place where you can almost hear the dust settling. I was flipping through a book about constellations when this guy sat down across from me. I didn't hear him approach. He just appeared and sat down, calm, composed, wearing a black jacket and jeans. He looked normal, maybe late 30s, clean cut, but with this serious expression. He said, without looking away from me, "Are you still watching the sky?" I blinked, a little startled. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. He smiled briefly, but it wasn't warm or friendly. It was more like he was confirming something. Then he said, "You should be careful what you look for. Some things aren't meant to be found." I tried to ask who he was, what he meant, but before I could get the words out, he stood up, left a small card on the table, and walked away. I looked down at the card. It had a name, E. Cross, and a phone number I didn't recognize, but no company or organization listed. I thought about calling, but something stopped me. Instead, I pocketed the card and left. That night, I went back outside to the same spot in the backyard, waiting for the blinking star or whatever it was to come back. But the sky was just regular stars, no blinking, no movement, just silence. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. My phone would lose signal in random places, even at home where reception is usually fine. Sometimes my camera's battery drained faster than it should, even when I wasn't using it. And I kept feeling like someone was watching me. Not in a paranoid way, but a quiet, constant awareness, like eyes just out of sight. One evening, I was walking home from the grocery store, only a 5-minute walk, and I noticed a car driving slowly past me twice. Nothing strange about that, except it had no visible license plate and the driver's face was obscured by the dark tint. When it passed the second time, I caught the driver glancing directly at me. I quickened my pace and got inside without looking back. I told Maggie about the car, the guy in the library, the blinking star. She suggested I report it to the police, but I felt like that would only make me look crazy. Besides, what could they do? Some guy in a black jacket said some weird stuff and a blinking light moved behind the trees. It sounded ridiculous. One night, I left the back door open a crack while I was inside. I don't usually do that, but it was warm enough. I was working on editing my photos when I heard a low humming noise outside, like a distant engine, but smoother, quieter. It lasted maybe 20 seconds and then faded away. I stepped outside and looked up, but the sky was empty. No blinking light, no strange shapes. The next morning, I woke up and realized my camera was missing from the kitchen table where I'd left it. The back door was closed, but the lock looked intact. I never found the camera. After that, I stopped going outside at night. I stayed in during the evenings and tried to put it all out of my head. But I kept thinking about that blinking star, the slow descent, the man at the library. And sometimes when the wind is just right, I swear I hear that low hum again. We were hiking out near the Trinity site. Not the actual blast zone that's fenced and locked, but there's BLM land all around it, mostly flat desert with these dry riverbeds and old crumbling fence posts half buried in sand. You can still find old radiation warning signs rusting in the brush if you look. We weren't trying to do anything spooky or off limits. My girlfriend Eliza had this goal to hike every marked trail in southern New Mexico before the year was out, and this one, a stretch near Mockingbird Gap, was on her list. It's not popular. No shade, no water. The guide site called it featureless, but historically notable. We parked just off the highway around 7:30 a.m., sun already hot even in October. We packed light, water, dried fruit, first aid, my Garmin watch, and Eliza's GPS app running on her phone. She liked to record our hikes. Usually the GPS logs matched up exactly, even if the cell signal was spotty. We started off heading east on a dirt track that cut through an old cattle gate. The trail follows what used to be a supply road during the Manhattan Project, though you wouldn't know it. Just gravel and scrub and endless yucca plants. We passed a dead coyote about an hour in, nothing fresh, just picked clean and sun-dried. I only mention it because Eliza made a joke about it being a bad omen. Should have brought sage, she said. It was flat the whole way. Easy walking. The heat shimmered over the sand like water, and the farther we went, the less there was to see. I remember Eliza checking her phone and saying we'd done 3.8 miles and were making good time. We took a break under what little shade the side of a small, rocky outcrop gave us. It wasn't much. After that, the trail sloped down into an arroyo, dry, cracked earth with a few odd animal tracks, and curved toward a low ridge. That's where things get hard to explain. We were walking side by side, not talking much, just the crunch of our boots and the wind. Then we both stopped at the same time. No sound, no wind, just dead still. That's what hit me first, the silence. You expect quiet in the desert, but this was different, oppressive. Not a single insect, not a single bird. The air felt heavy, like walking into a sealed room. Eliza turned to me and said, "Do you hear that?" I said, "I don't hear anything." She looked off to the right, toward a dry ridge about 30 yards off trail. I thought I heard something metallic, like a chain dragging. I didn't, but I nodded. We both stood there for maybe 30 seconds, just listening. Then I can't say what changed. There was no flash, no sound, no sudden feeling. But the light shifted, like the sun had moved behind clouds, only there weren't any. Everything felt flat, like contrast had been turned down. We kept walking. I don't remember deciding to. We just started moving again, like nothing happened. The next thing I remember clearly is the wind coming back. Just a little breeze, but enough to make the brush sway. And then the heat hit me all at once, like I'd just stepped back into it. I looked around, confused, because the arroyo looked deeper. The ridge we were approaching was closer than it should have been. Eliza was ahead of me now, maybe 20 feet, squinting at her phone. She stopped and called back. Did we miss a turn? I caught up. She showed me the GPS track. The blue line just skipped. One moment we were half a mile back. The next it resumed a mile farther along. No zigzag, no drift. Just a hard jump, like someone cut a chunk out of the recording. I checked my Garmin. Same thing. There was a gap, exactly 58 minutes missing. No heart rate, no elevation gain, no pace data. 1 second I was walking at 3.2 miles per hour. Next, nothing. Then back to normal, like we'd never stopped. We just stood there staring at our screens, trying to make sense of it. The sky was the same, no signs of a storm. We weren't dizzy, no headaches, nothing felt off in our bodies. I said maybe it was a bug, a GPS hiccup, but 2 devices, same stretch, same exact time. Didn't feel right. We turned back. Neither of us said much. The silence had crept back in, too. Not total, but wrong somehow. The wind sounded muffled, like it wasn't reaching us. Every step echoed. It's hard to explain. About halfway back, Eliza stopped and pointed to something sticking out of the sand. Looked like a rod at first, metal, maybe 2 feet long, angled upward like an antenna. I thought maybe it was part of some old equipment or survey gear. We walked up to it, but as we got closer, I saw that it wasn't attached to anything. Just a thin, dull gray cylinder jammed into the earth, no markings. She reached for it, and I don't know why, but I said, "Don't." It wasn't like I thought it would shock her or anything. I just didn't want her touching it. My stomach felt tight, and the air was hot again. Way hotter than it should have been. She stopped. We took a few pictures, but nothing clear. Glare made them useless. We marked the spot on her app, but when we checked later, the pin wasn't there. Just didn't save. When we got back to the car, we both felt wiped. More than we should have been for 8 miles on flat land. I checked the timestamp on the dash cam. We should have been back around noon. It was 1 to 17 p.m. Neither of us remembered stopping. No food break, no shade, just a missing hour. That night, we tried uploading the GPS data to her laptop. The files were intact, but when we zoomed in on the gap, it was just empty space. No time codes, just a clean cut. I exported the data and tried to open it in a text editor. The file jumped from 10:43:12 to 11:41. No error, no corruption, like nothing ever happened. We haven't hiked out there since. The weird part is we've never had GPS issues anywhere else, even places more remote. It was just that stretch, just that day. 1 hour we don't remember, 1 mile we didn't walk. My second night on shift, I saw lights where there weren't supposed to be any. I just started a contract job at Groom Lake late fall 2008. I was 26, ex-Navy, and needed decent money fast. I wasn't cleared for anything sensitive, just perimeter patrol on the south end of the restricted area. They didn't arm us, just radio check-ins every 30 minutes, and strict instructions not to leave our designated sector unless told. Everything felt like overkill, but the paycheck was solid. The guy I was paired with, Marcus, had been there 6 months already. Retired MP, quiet, maybe late 30s. First time I met him, he said, "Rule 1, if you see something strange," and he didn't. He wasn't joking, just gave me a look like that was the end of it. Night shifts were long and dead quiet. Our patrol loop was about 8 miles of gravel road between remote sensor poles. Flat desert on both sides, fenced off, empty as far as you could see. Most nights we just drove in slow loops and did visual checks. You're not supposed to sleep, but everyone does, 10 minutes at a time, engine running, windows cracked. That second night we were splitting loops. Marcus did the first one solo, while I waited at Station C in the truck. There's a little covered area there with a busted chair and a cooler full of off-brand Gatorade. I remember the wind that night. Strong gusts from the north. Real dry. You could hear it coming before it hit the truck, like a wave rolling over low hills. Around 2:40 a.m., I saw a white light out toward the basin, maybe 3 miles south past where the restricted boundary ends. Not a headlight or anything, just a solid white glow, stationary. I radioed Marcus and asked if he was seeing it. He didn't answer. I waited 10 seconds, called again, still nothing. That's when the light started moving. Not fast, just slow and straight, horizontal to the ground. It stayed at the same elevation, probably 30 or 40 feet up. At first, I thought it might be a drone, but there was no noise. Even with the wind, I should have heard something, a motor, a hum, but there was nothing. I got out and stood behind the truck door. The light kept coming. I figured I should call it in, but I hesitated. I kept hearing Marcus's voice in my head. Pretend you didn't. The light stopped maybe a mile out, still hovering. It was hard to tell size. It wasn't shining from anything, just a sphere of light like a glow stick without a source. No beam, no flicker, just hovering in place. I finally keyed up the mic again. "Marcus, you copy?" This time I got static. Then a weird pop. Not like interference, but like when you unplug a speaker while music's playing. Then his voice, low and fast. "Stay in the truck, don't look at it." That's all he said. I asked him where he was. He didn't answer, just more static, then silence. I backed into the truck and shut the door. Didn't start the engine. Just sat there with the radio in my hand, staring through the windshield. The light hadn't moved, but something else had. The ground near it looked off, like a shimmer, like heat waves above pavement, even though the air was cold. I turned off my flashlight and just watched. I didn't blink much. I was trying to convince myself it was a test flight, maybe something they didn't brief us on. But the longer I stared, the more wrong it felt. Around 3:10, it moved again. Not away, not toward me, just up. Straight vertical. Slow and smooth, no noise. It went up maybe 200 feet, then cut out completely. Not faded, just gone. I sat in the dark for another 15 minutes before Marcus pulled up behind me. His lights were off until he was right behind the truck. When he got out, he didn't say anything, just leaned against the hood and lit a cigarette. I walked over and asked what the hell that was. He shook his head. "Don't talk about it," he said. I told him I'd logged it. He looked at me hard. "You didn't see anything. You stayed in your sector, no anomalies. That's what the log says." I asked again what it was. He took a long drag, then said, "That wasn't for us. That's all you need to know." We didn't speak the rest of the shift. When morning came, we handed off to the day guys and filed our logs. Mine just said routine perimeter check, no incidents. I started to write something else, but stopped. The next few nights were quiet. I didn't see the light again. But things felt off in that sector after that. The wind died completely around the same time each night, between 2:30 and 3. Every time I passed Station C, my radio would fuzz out for exactly 8 seconds. Not more, not less. Just 8 seconds of static. I brought it up to Marcus once. He said the same thing. If it doesn't ask for you, don't go looking for it. By week 3, I stopped asking. I worked there for 5 months, only saw that light once more, near the end. Same area, same time of night. This time I didn't get out of the truck. Didn't even touch the radio. It floated for a while, then vanished like before. I didn't look for it after that. I finished my contract and never went back. Marcus stayed. I heard from another guy that he was still there in 2011, working nights. Said he liked the quiet. I think about that second night sometimes. Not just the light, but the way the ground shimmered around it. Like the space under it didn't want to be seen. Like whatever it was didn't care if you noticed, as long as you stayed where you were. It was just after 3 in the morning when it happened. Me and Bobby were working the overnight shift on a repaving crew about 40 miles outside Missoula, out on Highway 200. That stretch between Potomac and Ovando is dead quiet at night. No houses, no gas stations, just pine forest and the occasional truck hauling through. We were on mile marker 84, laying down fresh asphalt in the eastbound lane. Most of the crew had wrapped up by then. Just the 2 of us left, finishing cleanup and waiting on a tanker to bring more oil. Our supervisor, Ken, had driven off to meet the truck back near Clearwater Junction, said he'd be maybe an hour. So we were out there, standing in the dark with our vests and headlamps on, leaning against the pickup and shooting the breeze. Clear sky, warm for May, probably high 50s, and bone quiet. You could hear the wind brushing through the trees if you stopped talking long enough. Around 3:20, I think, Bobby lit a cigarette and pointed up at the stars. Said something dumb about Orion's belt being crooked, and I looked up just to humor him. I didn't see Orion. I saw something else. There was this patch of sky, almost directly overhead, where the stars just disappeared. Like someone had taken a cookie cutter to the night. It was shaped kind of like a boomerang, but real wide and subtle, no sharp corners. I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't already been looking up. It wasn't lit or glowing. It wasn't reflecting anything. It was just there, darker than the sky around it, and moving. It passed over us slower than a plane, but it was huge, massive. You couldn't see edges exactly, just this shape blotting out stars as it moved. No noise, not even a hum. I kept expecting to hear jets or rotors, but there was nothing. Bobby saw it too. He stopped mid-sentence and just stared. Neither of us said anything for maybe 10 seconds. We watched it glide from east to west, right across the highway and over the trees. It didn't cast a shadow, even with our work lights aimed up a bit. The stars reappeared behind it like nothing had been there. Once it was gone, Bobby finally spoke, just said, "What the hell was that?" I didn't have an answer. We stood there for a minute longer, looking where it went, then back at each other. Then I realized the forest had gone completely still. No insects, no birds, nothing. The kind of silence that presses on your ears. Bobby noticed it too. He flicked his cigarette and said we should wait in the truck. So we got in, closed the doors, and sat there with the engine off. A couple minutes later, the sound came back. Crickets, a far-off owl, wind in the branches, like flipping a switch. That's when I started wondering if we'd imagined it. But we hadn't both seen the same shape, same path, same silence, just to make it up. 10 minutes after that, Ken radioed in and said he'd be delayed. Something about a washout past the junction. Told us to sit tight another 45 minutes. We didn't say anything to him. Didn't seem worth it. Bobby stayed quiet the rest of the night. I caught him looking up a few times, real quick, like he didn't want to see it again. Next day, we didn't mention it to the rest of the crew. When Ken asked how the night shift went, Bobby just said, "Uneventful." And that was that. but I've driven that stretch maybe 20 times since, and I don't look up when I'm alone anymore. I was out in my backyard late one night, just like I usually am when the sky's clear. I live in Flagstaff, Arizona, so the light pollution's pretty low, and it's great for stargazing. I'm not a pro or anything, just an amateur astronomer. My setup's simple: a decent telescope, some star charts, and a DSLR to snap photos when I feel like it. I usually just sit out there for hours, tracking constellations or hunting for planets. That night, it was early spring, around 11:30 p.m. The air was dry and crisp, a little chilly but comfortable with a jacket. The moon was just a thin crescent, so the sky was pretty dark. I had been looking at the Hercules cluster for a while, just zooming in and out, taking long exposure shots to try and get a better view of some faint stars. Nothing unusual until I noticed something odd. I'd set the telescope up facing a patch of sky where there's usually a neat little grouping of stars. A cluster I'm familiar with. I remember thinking how clear the stars looked, sharp and steady. Then, through the eyepiece, I saw the whole cluster suddenly vanish. I mean, literally gone. The stars disappeared like someone had flipped a switch. It wasn't just dimming or flickering. The entire circle of stars was just not there. I blinked and moved the scope slightly, thinking maybe I'd lost focus or the clouds were rolling in, but the rest of the sky was fine. The stars around that spot were still there, twinkling as usual. It was just that perfect circle, maybe 10 or 12 stars, that vanished. It stayed like that for exactly 3 seconds, which I timed with my watch because it was so weird I figured I'd better keep track. Then, just as suddenly as they disappeared, the stars reappeared in the exact same positions. I stared at the eyepiece, trying to process what I'd just seen. My heart started beating a little faster. I looked around, checking for any clouds or anything that might have caused the effect. Nothing. The air was clear. I thought maybe I'd imagined it. So I waited a bit and refocused the telescope on the same spot. I didn't want to take another photo right away because the last one came out blurry. Instead, I just watched. After about 10 minutes, the stars in that exact spot flickered again. This time, it wasn't a total disappearance. It was like they dimmed drastically, then slowly brightened back up over a span of maybe 5 seconds. It was subtle, but definitely not normal. At that point, I started feeling uneasy, like I was being watched. My backyard isn't big, but it's surrounded by tall pines, so it's pretty isolated. I glanced behind me, half expecting a neighbor or a late-night dog walker. Nothing. I pulled out my phone to check the photos I'd taken. The images showed the star cluster perfectly visible in the first few shots. Then in the frame, from the exact moment the stars vanished, that circle was just a black hole against the rest of the sky. No stars, no light, just empty space. I couldn't explain it. I showed the photos to a couple of friends who are more into astronomy, but no one had a decent answer. They suggested everything from camera glitches to weird atmospheric interference, but none of it really fit. A perfect, sudden disappearance of a specific star cluster for 3 seconds? That's not normal. The next morning, I checked some online sky trackers and astronomical reports. No meteor showers, no solar flares, nothing unusual noted that would cause a cluster of stars to just blink out like that. That night, I went back out to watch again, hoping it was a one-off thing. But as I looked through the telescope, the same spot in the sky started to shimmer faintly, like heat haze on pavement, but in the cold night air. The stars twinkled erratically, almost like they were flickering in and out of existence. I felt like the sky itself was unstable there. I packed up early after that. The feeling I got watching that patch made me want to get inside. I kept the photos on my phone for a while, but after a couple of days, I deleted them. I couldn't shake the feeling that something about those images was off. Like, looking at them too long might pull me into the same weirdness I saw through the scope. Since then, I've been cautious about looking in that part of the sky. I don't get out there as much anymore, and when I do, I stick to familiar constellations far from that spot. I still don't know what I saw. It was real. I know that much. The stars literally disappeared and came back, and nothing I've read or heard explains how that could happen. I guess I'll keep looking up, but maybe not quite as close this time.